far enough. Time is running out. Will she meet with me, my constituent and these veterans to determine appropriate compensation?
The Prime Minister.
Well, again, Mr Speaker, I know the strength of feeling, and I'm grateful to his constituent Ronald and all the service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme, and I'm sure the Minister for Veterans would be happy to meet with him and the veterans to discuss this issue.
Rayner Brackenridge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Under the old guard of the Conservatives, families had to earn less than £7,400, often in low-paid and insecure work, to qualify for free school meals. But under this Labour government, thousands more children in Wolverhampton North East and 500,000 more across the country will benefit from free school meals. Will the Deputy Prime Minister outline how Labour's plans will put more money in parents' pockets?
Well, Mr Speaker, we're determined to tackle child poverty, which rose catastrophically under the last government, and that's why we're expanding access to free school meals to more than 500,000 children. This will lift 100,000 of the poorest children out of poverty and put £500 back into parents' pockets. This comes on top of 750 free breakfast clubs worth £450 a year to parents, and a historic uplift in the national minimum wage worth up to £2,500 to the lowest paid workers.
Given the Right Honourable Lady appears to be enjoying spending yet another week practising to be Prime Minister, maybe she can give us her view on who she would get rid of in the up-and-coming reshuffle. Would it be the Chancellor for killing economic growth? Would it be the Work and Pensions Secretary for the botched handling of the welfare bill and the winter fuel cuts? Would it be the Environment Secretary for trying to destroy British family farms? Would it be the Foreign Secretary for giving away British sovereign territory and paying billions to rent it back? Or given the Prime Minister is now polling as having the most unpopular first year in modern British political history, would she do herself and the country a favour and tell him to show himself the door?
Mr Speaker, maybe he wants to go next week because it's been... It's been quite the carousel, and the Leader of the Opposition said she was going to get better week on week. She already has in the last 2 weeks by not turning up. And Mr Speaker, I'm just wondering when they're going to give the Shadow Justice Secretary a go.
Oliver.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm proud and honoured to say that I've served this country as a reservist parachute, which is why I'd like to thank and take this opportunity to thank all our service members and their families during Armed Forces Week. This Labour government has announced the largest sustained increase since the end of the Cold War. Will the Deputy Prime Minister set out how the government will rebuild Britain and secure our defence for the future?
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question and for his service. He's absolutely right. Our armed forces represent the very best of Britain and put their lives on the line for us every day. It's our responsibility to support those who defend us, and we're delivering the biggest sustained boost to defence spending since the end of the Cold War. The Strategic Defence Review sets out our vision for defence, driving jobs and prosperity and renewing the nation's contract with those who serve to secure Britain into the future.
Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be asking the Right Honourable Lady another question at the Prime Minister's Questions, although this time just the one. There has been a proliferation of houses of multiple occupation in my constituency in places like Potters Bar and Borehamwood. Quiet residential streets like Tiverton Road and Organ Hall Road are being blighted by houses, quiet family houses, being converted into houses of multiple occupation, leading to a surge in antisocial behaviour and parking problems. May I therefore urge the Deputy Prime Minister to look at enhancing the powers of local councils to stop these kind of developments where they are not wanted.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I do miss our exchanges. I hope he's been wearing his Factor 50. He knows how it can get for us gingers in the hot weather. But he also knows, Mr Speaker, that local authorities have planning powers to limit the proliferation of small houses into multiple occupation. And his government left a housing crisis. I'm getting on with fixing that with the 1.5 million homes that we're going to deliver.
The member for Clacton put a singular burning injustice first. The plight of overseas billionaires paying too much tax. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with his priority, or with me, that the Reform UK doing sweetheart deals with the super rich is a betrayal of British working people?
Well, Mr Speaker, I was asked about the member for Clacton's mathematics the other week, and my honourable friend is absolutely right. The mask has slipped again this week. The honourable member for Clacton demands billions more in unfunded tax cuts for the very richest, while he marches through the lobbies in the House of Commons to vote against sick pay for the lowest earners. We know who pay for reform tax breaks, Mr Speaker, for overseas billionaires, tax hikes on working people and patients being charged to see their doctor. Labour won't let that happen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When my young constituent Axel was given his EHCP a year ago, his primary school place was withdrawn and no replacement offered. His nursery allowed him to stay on till Christmas, but since then, apart from a short break at a school, he's had nothing. He's at home with his mum, no alternative provision for younger children, and those young children can't travel a long way. His mother also can't go to work. So while I welcome the white paper in the autumn, can the Deputy Prime Minister commit to Axel's mum, but also the parents of Freddie, Ewan, Ethan and the other 640 SEND children with no school to go? There'll be somewhere for them in September.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm really sorry to hear about Axel and the other cases that the honourable member mentioned. Those with special educational needs do deserve proper support and shouldn't be left at home. We're determined to fix the SEND system and support children before issues escalate to this type of crisis point. We're investing £3.4 billion this year to deploy specialist teams across early years and primary school settings, helping to identify and respond to speech and language needs, particularly for children with SEND. And we'll set out our full plans, Mr Speaker, to the reform of SEND this autumn, including support for early years.
You, Mr Speaker. Growth needs to be delivered and felt in all parts of the country, and the infrastructure strategy, changes to the Green Book and the £1.8 billion secured for the North East are a clear demonstration of our commitment to that. In my area, Moor Farm Roundabout is blocking growth and is causing misery for people locally. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that improving infrastructure in the north, like at Moor Farm, will show how we are investing in all parts of the country?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, she's absolutely right, Mr Speaker. The previous government didn't have a plan for areas like the North East, and I know she's been a champion regarding the Moor Farm roundabout. And this government is changing the situation by investing £15.6 billion funding for local transport projects across the country, opening up access to jobs and improving living standards, including in the North East.
Neil O'Brien.
Mr Speaker, Labour have invited proposals from cities to expand their boundaries, and the Mayor of Leicester wants to expand the cities to swallow up areas like Oadby, Wigston and Great Glen. But local people don't want this, and thousands of them have signed our petition against it. It's not just the higher council tax, they want to keep their own local identity. So will the Deputy Prime Minister rule out this totally unwelcome city takeover? And if she does want to press ahead with it, will she at least give us a say in a local referendum so that we can tell her again, we don't want this?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, what they were told at the general election is they don't want you. I mean, all right then, your government. You might have slipped through. But the one thing I will say, Mr Speaker, is the honourable member said about his own government. There's a lot of things we should have done. There's a lot of things we should do that we didn't do. And to be honest, I couldn't agree more, and we're getting on and doing it.
In Armed Forces Week, will the Deputy Prime Minister join with me in paying tribute to my former colleagues at RAF Bryce Norton? I know she will share my horror that some on the opposition benches responded to that appalling attack on that base, not by recognising the consequences of 14 years of Conservative underinvestment in our defence, but by personally smearing one of our brave members of the Royal Air Force. Does Would she agree with me and my honourable and gallant friend from North East Derbyshire that this Labour government will always support our armed forces and that those shameful comments of Deputy Reform bring disgrace upon him and his party?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable and gallant friend speaks with great authenticity and authority on this matter. And the attack on the RAF Bryce Norton was disgraceful. But what was even more disgraceful is Reform blaming the commanding officer, an accomplished woman who has served her country, rather than the criminals that were responsible. That's not leadership, Mr. Speaker, but we shouldn't expect anything better from the party of the Putin apologists.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. London boroughs are collectively facing a funding shortfall of at least £500 million for the current financial year. But despite this, the money allocated to local authorities in London by the government spending review fell 35% short of the amount requested by London councils. Now, under the government's planned changes to local authority funding, the two councils in my constituency, Richmond and Kingston, are set to lose out even more while the cost of funding local services continues to rise. Is it the government's policy that London residents should continue to receive ever-increasing council tax bills while their local authorities have less and less money to spend? Thank you.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I would say is that we're fixing the foundations of local government after 14 years of austerity that was inflicted with the aiding and abetting of her party on local government. In the past, we're putting record funding into local government and multi-year settlements to help them. We're helping local government where they ruined it.
Elsie Blundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Digital black spots are areas without good mobile broadband connectivity are holding communities back. In Middleton, an area my right honourable friend knows well as a fellow Greater Manchester MP, many local businesses and people remain cut off from the economic growth of the wider city region due to lack of mobile signal. How can we make sure that this government's mission to capitalise on the promise of technology is felt in all parts of the country, including Middleton?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she's absolutely right. I've had digital black spots as well myself, so I understand the member's frustration. I would say to the member, the industrial strategy was launched this week, and there were some great ideas, and now we make sure we get super fast broadband everywhere, and that we can all use our phone, Mr. Speaker, to make sure we can get connected when they left us disconnected.
Yeah. Final question, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, 86 people were killed in Gaza by Israeli forces. A further 56 were shot dead whilst queuing for food to try to sustain themselves under the occupation of the Israeli forces. Israel stands condemned for acts of genocide, for war crimes, for their occupation of Gaza and their activities in the West Bank. So 2 points to the Deputy Prime Minister. Why does Britain still supply parts for the F-35 jets that have been used to take so much life in Gaza? And secondly, how is it that this country has got to this situation where we stand on the wrong side of international law when war crimes and genocide are concerned? So will she support my private member's bill calling for an independent inquiry into how our policies evolved into this parlous situation?
Yeah. The Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Israel's recent action is appalling and counterproductive, and we strongly oppose to the expansion of military operations, settler violence and blocking of humanitarian aid. We have suspended FTA talks and sanctioned extremists supporting settler expansion in the West Bank, and it's a long-standing principle, Mr. Speaker, that genocide is determined by competent international courts and not for government, and we do not sell arms trades directly to IDF that might breach international humanitarian law.
Right, that completes Deputy Prime Minister's questions. Right. We now come to the urgent question. Shadow Secretary of State, James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Defence if he will make a statement on his department's plan to procure nuclear-certified F-35A aircraft.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK will purchase 12 new F-35A fighter jets and join NATO's dual-capable aircraft nuclear mission in a major boost for national security. The Prime Minister has announced at the NATO summit that the UK intends to buy at least a dozen of the dual-capable aircraft, which can carry both nuclear and conventional weapons. The NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has said this morning the UK has declared its nuclear deterrent to NATO for many decades, and I strongly welcome today's announcement that the UK will now also join NATO's nuclear mission and procure the F-35A. The decision will support 20,000 jobs in the F-35 programme in the UK, with 15% of the global supply chain for the jets based in Britain, supporting highly skilled jobs and opportunities for working people and delivering a defence dividend across the country. This announcement responds to two recommendations in the Strategic Defence Review, Recommendation 30 and Recommendation 46, that the UK commence discussions on the potential benefits and feasibility of enhanced participation in NATO's nuclear mission and about the mix of F-35B and F-35A. The purchase represents the biggest strengthening of the UK's nuclear posture in a generation. It also reintroduces a nuclear role for the Royal Air Force for the first time since the UK retired its sovereign air-launched nuclear weapons following the end of the Cold War. The UK's commitment to NATO is unquestionable, as is the alliance's contribution to keeping the UK safe and secure, but we must step up, all of us, to protect the Euro-Atlantic area for generations to come.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting this UQ. You will recall that the government's plan announced today to procure nuclear-certified F-35As was previously covered in the Sunday Times the day before the SDR was published. You therefore granted a UQ that day on this very subject. We received no meaningful answers at all, and I hope that the Minister can be more forthcoming today. So I wrote in the Express on the 25th of May that our nuclear forces needed to be even more resilient, including CASD, but also, and I quote, potentially by diversifying our methods for delivering nuclear strike. The reason for this is that we have to recognise the threat posed by Russia in particular and its ability to operate nuclear weapons at tactical and theatre levels. To deter effectively, we must be able to do the same. So in principle, I welcome this announcement, but have the following questions. What is the anticipated in-service date for the 12 F-35As, and will they already be nuclear certified, or will that occur after delivery? We note that the 12 F-35As will be ordered instead of 12 F-35Bs, but will the government still order the remaining F-35Bs as planned? How will the F-35As be air-to-air refuelled, given that the current RAF refuelling capability is probe and drogue? On operational sovereignty, we are fully committed to our strong military partnership with the United States. But given this is about diversity of delivery, has the Department given any thought to additional tactical options where we have greater industrial input, e.g. Storm Shadow and Typhoon? To conclude, Mr. Speaker, ironically it was Lord Robertson as Defence Secretary in 1998 who removed our last air-launched nuclear capabilities, and it is noteworthy that as one of the authors of the SDR, he said in front of the Select Committee recently that the authors were, and I quote, not terribly enthusiastic about it. And that's before we get to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary who voted against the renewal of Trident. Yep. But on this side of the House, we wholeheartedly back our nuclear deterrent. And doesn't this show why we need a robust plan to get to 3% on defence this Parliament, rather than Labour's smoke and mirrors plan and a lack of fully funded planning to properly increase defence spending this Parliament?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the in-service date, as the Secretary of State said this morning, we're hopeful that these aircraft will start delivering before the end of the decade. In terms of whether or not the tranche being ordered, which will now include 12 F-35As, yes, we will still be ordering the remaining F-35Bs, so that's 15 extra F-35Bs in the next tranche. In terms of the refuelling, this is a NATO mission, and NATO, of course, will be able to do the air-to-air refuelling. It's quite normal for different allies to contribute their different capabilities, whether nuclear capable or whether conventional, to NATO's nuclear mission.
Kelvin Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to welcome the announcement and on behalf of the Defence Select Committee to represent our welcomeness at the additional detail that's been added to the SDR. However, it's imperative we recognise and close some of the gaps in our national defence, including the size and shape of our combat armed air force, and that this announcement does part of that today. But 14 years of underinvestment means that some of the choices about basing and complementary capabilities will bring about some challenges. Would the Minister provide any additional detail on how some of these may be addressed?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that my honourable friend is supportive of the announcement. As the House is aware, this government has increased our defence spending by more than at any time since the end of the Cold War, and it is fully funded, unlike some of the fantasy plans of the previous government. We have shown how we will increase to 2.6% of GDP by 2027. We have made it clear. It's fully funded. We've made it clear. We've made it clear how we will get to 3% in the next Parliament if as conditions allow. And this announcement today at NATO about the 5% is something that all allies will be focusing on funding in due course over the next 10 years. NATO will be checking every year, as it always does, whether or not its requirements are being met, and we fully expect to be able to meet them.
Helen Maguire, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that we've entered a new and uncertain era. The threat posed by Putin's imperialism represents a once-in-a-generation threat to our security. We must maintain the effectiveness of the UK's independent nuclear deterrent to stop Putin or anyone else from launching a nuclear attack. It remains the ultimate guarantor of Britain's security. We support more investment in our defence capability, but we need more detail on the proposed use cases for the F-35As, its relation to our existing and strong deterrent through Trident, and a clear explanation on why it has chosen their priority over others. Indeed, there are still huge gaps in our armed forces, including the 10,000 troop cuts by the Conservatives, which need filling if we're to show Putin that we are serious. So can the Minister confirm, therefore, whether it will move further and faster in rebuilding the strength and size of the other essential guarantor of UK security and deterrence, the British Army?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the Honourable Lady supports these measures, and as I've already made clear, this decision is not at the expense of also buying more F-35Bs. We are going to do that. The extent to which we fully implement the SDR will be decided, and in what order we do implement the recommendations will be decided through our investment plan, which is being worked on now, will be fully published and available in due course. But there's no doubt about the fact that, as she says, the threats that we face are increasing. We need to make sure that with our allies in NATO, we are capable of deterring those threats, and this decision will assist us in doing that. By joining the NATO nuclear mission, we'll be able to play our part. As we said in the SDR, NATO first, and our commitment to NATO is unshakable.
Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I commend the prompt procurement of the F-35, a fixed wing. It's of huge strategic importance. However, this is creating already some great uncertainty in Lancashire, in Chorley, Mr. Speaker, in my constituency of South Ribble, where the workforce of the Typhoon Eurofighter. Can she please assure me that the government will still constantly look at procuring the Typhoon aircraft for the RAF? But also, is there not a huge opportunity here now as well, with our NATO partners all increasing their defence spending, to urge them and encourage them to procure the Typhoon Eurofighter as well? Thank you.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his comments, and of course that what we're talking about today does not preclude any support for Typhoon. We're very committed to our Typhoons. We are committed to upgrading them as per our already existing plans. We are engaged in many efforts to export, some of which one would hope would come off at some point in the not too distant future. And we are very keen on making sure that the skills and abilities of the workforce at Wharton are fully utilised. And of course, we have Future Combat Air GCAP, which will also utilise those skills into the longer term. And of course, many people working for BAE Systems, not at Wharton but at Samlesbury, do indeed make parts for the F-35, and so they, I think, will be pleased to hear the announcement today.
Lincoln Chop.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join my front bench in welcoming the answer to the urgent question that we've asked today? Maybe it should have been a statement. But can I ask about the autonomy and the national sovereignty when it comes to the weapons system that will be deployed from this aircraft? There are considerable press reports that it's going to be dual key, namely the Brits can't use it without American say-so. Is that true? And if so, why has the Ministry of Defence elected for that option rather than full national sovereignty?
Mr. Speaker, we have a fully sovereign national nuclear capability, CASD, which is dedicated totally to NATO and to protecting the European homeland. The current decision is about joining the NATO nuclear mission. Any mission under that requires the agreement of the NATO Nuclear Planning Group of 31 allies who act as the senior body on nuclear matters in the alliance. So the UK will also always retain the right to participate or not to participate on the basis of that governance arrangement.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say how much I welcome this announcement and the extra capability that it will bring. Could the Minister just outline how it will support jobs across the UK and particularly for those in my constituency of North East Derbyshire who work in defence?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the procurement of the F-35A and the next tranche of F-35B, it will support 20,000 jobs across the UK, with over 100 UK-based suppliers who contribute to the F-35 programme, demonstrating yet again that defence can be an engine for growth because these are good jobs across all parts of the nations and regions of the UK, including my honourable friend's constituency.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I fully welcome this announcement. I thank the Minister for making the statement. But in an age of uncertainty about the reliability of our US ally, it does seem an odd choice to be leaning into them and in the sense that we will be dropping dual-key US-made munitions from these planes. It does make more sense if this is a stepping stone to a fully sovereign UK capability, which then raises questions under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Would the Minister comment on whether this is a stepping stone to a fully sovereign UK capability?
Mr. Speaker, it isn't such a step. We are joining a NATO nuclear mission. And we have just published a strategic defence review that sets out the fact that our defence posture is NATO first. We're trying to support our allies in NATO to deter any potential threat that might come from possible adversaries. That is what this is about. It's not a stepping stone to anything else.
Kevin Bonham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also welcome the announcement of the increased capability of the F-35As that will be brought to the defence of this country. This announcement, in line with the Strategic Defence Review, shows that this country is once again serious about defence. By now joining NATO's nuclear mission, can my honourable friend tell the House what response we've had from our NATO allies to this position?
Minister.
Well, I welcome my honourable friend's support, but we've had strong support from our allies in NATO, and indeed during the course of replying to the honourable gentleman's urgent question, I did read out the response of the Secretary-General, who was very, very fulsome in his praise.
Benabesicek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Minister is probably well aware of my interest in the F-35 programme. Lockheed Martin manufactures around 150 jets a year, and there are currently nearly 600 on order across everyone from Switzerland to Singapore, on top of the 1,200 still to be delivered to the US Air Force. So whereabouts are we in the queue? She mentioned that we would expect to see the first delivery before the end of the decade, but are we going to be cutting to the front of the line effectively? Given current orders aren't due to be fulfilled until 2032 for some of those allies, will we see delivery of all 12 planes completed within a decade? And just quickly on refuelling, can she clarify that we have no sovereign air-to-air refuelling capability outside of a NATO mission?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman, who I know has a very close interest in these matters because I have to answer all his parliamentary questions. And I welcome that interest. As the Secretary of State said this morning, we're hopeful that we can start having delivery of these planes before the end of the decade. The honourable gentleman is right, of course, that any manufacturing capability has queues, but they're also subject to contractual discussions and arrangements can be made. So that is what we're aiming for, and obviously we will keep the House we'll keep the House informed as to how we manage to get on.
Luke Capers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry.
Luke Capers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the news that our deterrent capability is going to be enhanced in this way and made more flexible with another step in the escalatory ladder. Given that this is a US aircraft with substantial UK industrial participation, a US weapon and US-UK decision-making and a NATO mission, will the Minister agree that it's a powerful statement of the strength of the special relationship between the US and the UK and the strength of the NATO alliance?
I agree very much with both of those points that my honourable friend has made. It does indicate the strength both of our alliance with the US, but also the growing strength of NATO.
Dave Dougal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't understand industrially or militarily why F-35 is the default choice. If it's going to be delivered by the end of the decade, why is Tempest not being considered for this, which will be delivered by the middle of the next in the 2030s and is more than capable of delivering, assuming you agree with being part of the nuclear sharing enterprise, which I don't, because no other state who is nuclear armed takes part in nuclear sharing. No other P5 member delivers any other nation's nuclear deterrent, and no nuclear power in the world delivers anyone else's nuclear weapons.
Minister.
I hear what the honourable gentleman says. We are committed to buying 138 F-35s. This is part of the next tranche of F-35s. And we've substituted 12 F-35A for what would have been 12 F-35B. So in that sense, Mr. Speaker, this is a change to the mix. This was something that was recommended in the Strategic Defence Review, and one of the recommendations that was that we should consider the mix. We've considered it. One of the recommendations was that we should rejoin the NATO nuclear mission. We've considered it, we've consulted, and we're acting. Already we have implemented 2 of the major recommendations of that SDR, and I think that given the welcome the SDR had around the House, we should all be glad to see the implementation of those recommendations.
Tristan Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister on the very welcome announcement of the F-35A programme, which comes at a time where this government is increasing defence spending at a rate not since the Cold War. BAE Systems, in my constituency, is one of those leading on this programme to support avionics for our forces, and I know there is an outstanding invitation for her to visit. But can she confirm this announcement will mean a significant increase in jobs and opportunities, including apprenticeships for local people and young people and constituents across my area and the country?
Yes, I'm reminded of my promise to visit, which is on the list. It's on the list. It's going to move up closer to the top of the list after today. I agree with what my honourable friend has just said, and it's absolutely key if we're going to deter our potential aggressors and our potential adversaries, that we implement the findings of the SDR, that we increase our capability, and that is what we're doing.
Sir Julian Lewis.
May I encourage the government not to be at all bashful about the fact that the decision on whether or not, heaven forbid, one of these weapons should be used will be an American one. There is a long tradition of American nuclear weapons being based in NATO countries, not least the Cruise and Pershing missiles of the 1980s, which helped end the Cold War. So will she confirm, therefore, that not only does this actually fill a gap in our deterrent spectrum, but it also reasserts the commitment of the United States to the defence of the other NATO countries?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman is correct. It does all of those things, and I think he's made a very good point.
Chris Bangle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the acquisition of the F-35As, not least for the impact it's going to have on industry and jobs in my own constituency. In answer to the question about refuelling, my honourable friend, I think, described very well how this new capability meshes in with existing NATO capability. Could she say a little bit more about how this capability supports not only the defence of the UK, but also our NATO allies?
Well, my honourable friend is correct. In addition to the industrial benefits that we ought to glean from this increasing F-35 order, it's absolutely right that it strengthens NATO. And that is what the Strategic Defence Review said. We should focus on NATO first. That's what we're doing. And rejoining the NATO nuclear mission is a very striking commitment, a commitment that we made, a recommendation that we've accepted that we're now implementing.
Thank
you very much, Mr. Speaker. I also welcome this announcement. But can we talk about money? We already know that 20% of our defence budget is spent on the nuclear deterrent. It is disproportionately expensive. If we're extending the nuclear capability now for these airdrop weapons, what impact will that have on the budget for the rest of our conventional armed forces?
Well, I welcome the Honourable Lady's support. The F-35As are actually cheaper than the F-35Bs, and so the fact that we are replacing 12 F-35B orders with 12 F-35A orders does actually mean that it's a cheaper option. So she doesn't have to be too concerned about the direct impact of this decision on budgets. The total cost of procurement, the next tranche, including the 12A models, will be an estimated £3.2 billion. But these were plans that were there that we are now funding.
Mr. Speaker, will my honourable friend join me in praising the Rugby No. 1 branch of the Royal British Legion, who I believe are in Tesco this week for a service, and also the Hill Morton branch of the RBL, who will be holding a ceremony on Armed Forces Day. Look, I was very pleased to see that this commitment will support 20,000 jobs across the UK in the years to come, with over 100 UK-based suppliers contributing to the F-35 programme. Does my honourable friend agree that this demonstrates that our national security and economic security go hand in hand, and that this government will deliver that?
Well, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman's Royal British Legion branches who are getting on with what many of us are doing in Armed Forces Week, which is attending events that show our appreciation for our armed forces in every part of the UK. My honourable friend is correct. In addition to deterring our enemies, supporting NATO more strongly and our allies, there is growth potential, and we can have economic benefit from the spending that we put into our armed forces and our capabilities.
Savile Roberts.
The proposed NATO 5% target will be split into two categories. A new, broader set of defence-related items at up to 1.5% of GDP, alongside a commitment to spend at least 3.5% of GDP on traditional defence. Can the Minister confirm the UK Government's commitment to Article 2 of the NATO Treaty, the development of peaceful and friendly international relations, and confirm that funding for UN peacekeeping missions qualifies as defence spending to NATO, and that this budget will not lose out on the increase in the MOD budget?
Well,
Minister.
I would argue that defence spending, Mr. Speaker, is to create peace. It's not to fight wars, and it's actually cheaper to deter wars than it is to end up fighting them. And so I would argue that our commitment to 2.6% it will be by 2027, to 3% in the next Parliament, and then on to the 5% target, including the 1.5% more broad definition by 2035, shows a very strong commitment across NATO to do just that. Let's deter these wars.
Mark Seward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Minister's response to this urgent question today. The purchase of 12 new F-35A aircraft will increase our nuclear capabilities and does show that our commitment to NATO is unshakable. Now, as the chair of the Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire APPG, I'm always on the lookout for opportunities for growth in my region. And given that this announcement supports 20,000 jobs and places 15% of the global supply chain in the UK, can the Minister say how this will benefit my region and how she will ensure that all of the investment, the jobs, the growth opportunities will be spread to each part of the UK?
Well, I can't say precisely if any of the 100 companies that are UK-based suppliers on this programme are in his constituency or in his region. I have to go away and look it up. But I do know that that these procurements do spread prosperity around the whole of the UK, all of our regions and nations, and that is one of the great things about the defence industry. It provides jobs and growth across the UK.
So Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Minister of Defence Procurement's announcement today. This is welcome news for our country. Given that key pieces of military equipment in-service dates are often later than predicted, has the Minister given any thought to training our pilots in advance of delivery, either on a simulator or by embedding them into a unit that operates these planes around the world, so that we're ready to hit the ground running as soon as they're delivered?
The right honourable gentleman is correct. Anything that can bring in-service dates forward slightly by planning and training in advance is something that we will be in favour of trying to do. And I think it's much more the case these days that those arrangements are thought of at the same time as the procurement. So I'm absolutely certain that we'll be on to the point that he's made.
Dr. Scott up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just following on from the previous question, I do have to declare that I have flown an F-35 simulator. Dramatic pause.
Yeah, be going there.
And that is because there's companies in Edinburgh involved in the supply chain, and I was really keen to see what is they're constructing. So I welcome the Minister's leadership on this. It's a fantastic sign that we are absolutely committed to NATO. And it's also a fantastic advertisement for our young people who are looking for a great career. They have to look no further than the RAF. But much of the discussion is focused on the nuclear capabilities of the aircraft. Can she confirm that this aircraft has a much wider role than that and can be put to much greater use?
Yeah, well,
Minister,
my honourable friend is correct. This is a dual-capable aircraft, and it won't only be being used to fly NATO nuclear missions. It will also be available to do things such as training and to all the other things that our fantastic pilots in the RAF do.
Caroline Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel like a lone voice, but in an increasingly unstable world, I personally find it quite harrowing that the British Air Force might be flying planes that can drop nuclear bombs and where that might lead. Under this agreement, could the Minister tell us whether tactical nuclear weapons will be stored on UK soil, and if so, what safety and security measures will the government be undertaking for their storage?
Minister.
I'm not sure I quite understood that question, Mr. Speaker. I think what I can say though is that it's not it's not normal, and it's not something we do to confirm or deny whether or not where nuclear weapons might be stored. It's not something that we've ever done. I think that's what she was asking, but I'm not absolutely sure. I'm happy to speak to her afterwards if I've got that question wrong.
Andrew Morrison.
Have any alternative platforms been considered for the potential delivery of a tactical nuclear weapon? In particular, has the government looked at the Astute-class attack submarine as an alternative or additional platform, and its successor, the SSN AUKUS?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not seeking to broaden or widen our range of nuclear capability. We're joining the NATO nuclear mission and contributing to that. So, as I said earlier, this is not some kind of stepping stone into acquiring tactical nuclear weapons. Our nuclear deterrent is in CASD, it's submarine operated, and that's how it will continue.
Other chance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The prospect of UK fighter jets carrying Donald Trump's nuclear bombs cannot be anybody's vision of security. This decision flies in the face of our obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It ties us further into a US military that cannot even keep its own classified intelligence secure. It ties us further to a Trump administration that is the very definition of a loose cannon. Given the inescapable truth that nuclear weapons make the world more dangerous and that normalising tactical weapons is incredibly reckless, how can she possibly justify this decision?
Minister.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, what I've announced today is compliant with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. There is compliant with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and there isn't any question of the NATO nuclear mission being. It has as a governance. The NATO nuclear planning group of 31 allies, everybody gets a say, and so it's not a question of it being Donald Trump or any other US president's nuclear bomb. This is a NATO mission to defend Europe and to do what NATO is set up to do, which is to deter another war.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the 6th of January this year, in this chamber, I asked the Minister, given that refurbishing Typhoons won't even touch the sides of maintaining the 6,000 workforce at Wharton in Fylde in my constituency, and relying on export orders that have not secured, will not keep the workforce in work for now before the GCAP project comes online. In response to that, when I asked her whether she would give a delayed Christmas present of 25 Typhoon orders, she said, "It might not be a Christmas present, I don't know when his birthday is, but a present at some time later." Well, it turns out the SDR contained an empty box when it came to a present for Typhoons for the Wharton site. So if she wasn't simply buying time and giving false hope to the workforce there, when can we see the order of 25 Typhoon jets for the RAF?
Minister.
I don't think that the previous government was committed to buying Typhoons, so I don't see why you should be so outraged about the fact that after less than a year we've not yet ordered any more Typhoons. We are committed to the Typhoon fleet that we have. Any further considerations of buying more Typhoons are going to have to be considered in the investment plan. In the investment plan that's being worked on now, we are, and that other European nations are buying some Typhoons, so there is some work there for some. I know that they're not assembled at Wharton if other nations buy them, and we have export orders that we're trying to pursue. So although I can't advance what I said to him in December before Christmas, it is something that I'm very conscious of, and we will continue to do what we can to see what can be done about the future of our Typhoon fleet. But we're committed to the fleet that we've got and to the upgrades that we need.
No, Chester.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In response to an earlier question, I was pleased to hear the Minister commit to seeking to compress the timetable between delivery and in-service date. I believe I heard the Minister say that the delivery date was back end of the 2020s. Can she confirm the anticipated in-service date?
Minister.
I can't confirm the anticipated in-service date beyond saying that we're hopeful that we'll get them as soon as possible and that we'll be able to use them as soon as possible thereafter, subject to all the usual requirements to get something in service. That's as good as I can do for him today, I'm afraid.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister just confirmed that the UK adheres to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That treaty requires nuclear-armed states, the declared nuclear-armed states, to not allow proliferation and to take steps towards nuclear disarmament. What she's announced today is an increase in nuclear capability, construction of new nuclear warheads that can be used, obviously, anywhere in the world by airdropping them. Can she explain how it is possible to announce that this is in compliance with the NPT when it so obviously and so clearly is the very opposite of that?
The right honourable gentleman is wrong, I'm afraid. This is in compliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The NATO nuclear mission would carry US nuclear weapons, which are already subject to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And so what we're announcing today is buying aircraft that are capable of assisting with that mission, not purchasing new nuclear weapons. And I hope that that is clear for the right honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, the aim is to enhance what NATO has as a defensive structure. Can she confirm that this is not a substitute for any of our other NATO allies who are withdrawing aircraft from service, and so we're actually adding to the potential threat that we actually cover in case we're attacked?
We are adding some of our capability by purchasing these weapons to the NATO nuclear mission, and that's something that's being welcomed by allies and by the NATO Secretary General. It is improving the position for the NATO nuclear mission.
Dr. Alpinkert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement today. With the announcement of the purchase of these 12 F-35As, there is concern expressed that I've read this morning from defence analysts about the size of this fleet and whether that truly represents a capable either offensive launch or indeed a capable deterrent. But if I could just ask the Minister to clarify, in earlier statements I think she's both said that these F-35s are part of the current F-35 purchase envelope, but I think I also heard her say that potentially these F-35s are in addition to the F-35s currently on order. I'd be very grateful for clarification on that point. And finally, can the Minister also offer any reflection on the effect that this purchase has on our commitment to the GCAP programme?
I didn't, for clarity, say that this was in addition to I did not say it was in addition to our already committed tranche of F-35s. What I said was that we were substituting 12 what would have been F-35Bs for F-35A. So it's not in addition, but our tranche of we already have 39. We're committed to. We've already purchased 48, not all of which have been delivered. This is a tranche of the next 27, 12 of which will be F-35A, 15 of which will be F-35B. So it's part of the next tranche of acquiring the F-35s that governments of all stripes have been committed to over the time period that the F-35 has been in production.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Minister recognises that in addition to this plan to diversify the deterrent launch method, the UK must ensure that our strategic custody enterprise has an effective and productive industrial base, delivering faster maintenance times. So therefore, can she confirm whether or not these aircraft will be budgeted from the ring-fenced defence nuclear enterprise budget?
Very good.
Minister.
The ring-fenced defence nuclear enterprise is not for purchasing aircraft. It's for dealing with our submarines, and it's a fair question. I hope that that's a clear answer.
Jim Shaw.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. I was in automatic pilot there. Miles away. I'm going to sit back. Sorry, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Very kind to bring me forward. Can I thank the Minister for her answers? Positive and strong. It's just what this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland needs today. So thank you, Minister. Thank you for that. I welcome the news that these jets are to be procured. Having watched the Red Arrows intricate manoeuvres in Newton hours on Armed Forces Day last Saturday. I know that our skilled pilots are world class and deserve the tools to do their vital job. However, I also recently read that the Royal Navy has failed to meet recruitment targets regularly from 2011. So what can the Minister do to get boots in the planes, on the boats, on land, through enhanced recruitment, particularly of our Royal Navy at this very, very important time? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, part of our commitment to defence reform is to try and improve our procurement and acquisition to make sure that we meet our contract aspirations more quickly, that we've got more control of the budget, there are more direct lines of accountability, and that it will be clearer if things are going wrong, that there should be interventions. And so I think that the defence reform agenda that the Department is undertaking at the moment should improve our acquisition and procurement arrangements.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the rare opportunity against the run of play to follow my near neighbour from Strangford. Mark Rutte, the Secretary-General for NATO, has today congratulated President Trump on his decisive action against Iran, which he says makes us all safer. Will the Minister take the opportunity to do what no one in government so far has done and also congratulate the Americans for taking out the Iranian nuclear programme? Or instead will she then explain why we are out of step not only with the Americans but also now with NATO?
Minister.
Well, I think it's been fairly clear from proceedings in the House that the government has said that we agree that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, but that in this instance we were very keen that diplomacy is a way forward.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Armed Forces Week, I want to thank our brave servicemen and women who do so much to keep us safe. I welcome the Minister's response to this urgent question tabled by His Majesty's opposition. But can the Minister give a cast-iron reassurance that our continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent will be supported and maintained by His Majesty's government, and that they will not contemplate any reduction in the submarine fleet from 4 to 3 submarines, a policy alarmingly floated by the third party not so long ago?
Minister.
Well, I've been very clear, and the government has been very clear about our commitment to the continuous at-sea deterrent, to procuring the new dreadnought boats and the new warhead, so I can give him an absolute assurance on that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. UK has 225 warheads and a number of nuclear-capable submarines that are in a position to fire at any adversary at short notice. We are now investing in aircraft that can deploy nuclear weapons. As a signatory of a non-proliferation treaty, wouldn't that be seen as an aggravating feature for nations that are also subscribed to it?
No, Mr. Speaker, our continuous at-sea deterrent has been policy of both governing parties for many years, and that has not changed. The announcement today is about us joining the NATO nuclear mission, which carries US weapons that are already accounted for under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it isn't about increasing the number of nuclear weapons that we hold, and it's not therefore a breach of the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a member of the RAF contingent of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme under Wing Commander Vasco Smith, could I take this opportunity? I know the application window is open for next season. If any member hasn't applied to it, they should. Recently we visited Marham, the current home of the F-35s. Can the Minister update as to what risks or what steps have been taken to remove the risk of attack on centralised basing and to continue to invest in alternative dispersal bases for our aircraft? And also, while these additional frames are welcome, will the Minister confirm that this is being matched by concurrent investment in the training of not just pilots but additional crews and what will be required advanced skill sets for these operations?
Yes, the honourable gentleman is correct that one can't just buy aircraft and not train the relevant people, whether they be pilots or engineers or ground crew, to deal with the necessity of looking after them and operating them. In terms of security, I think that my honourable friend, the Armed Forces Minister, made a statement yesterday, Mr Speaker, or the day before, about the review that's being conducted into the security of our bases, and I hope that that will be reported in due course.
Right, that completes the urgent question. A point of order, Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On Monday, the High Court ordered a £60,000 cap on the contribution to the government's legal fees by campaigners seeking justice for the change in the pension age, the so-called WASPy women. This is a major breakthrough for that campaign, which has had support from across the House. The member for Leeds East is here, the member for Salford, and many others. You recall, Mr Speaker, the Ombudsman highlighted maladministration by the DWP, and no government of any party has stepped up to the mark, including this one. Have you had any notice, Mr Speaker, of the government bringing a statement to the House to see if an appropriate offer can be made to these women to end this injustice?
I can assure the right honourable gentleman that I have had no notice that the government are going to come and make a statement. What I can say is certainly put the points on the record. I know the Treasury bench will have heard what he's got to say. From that, we will then move on to Belravia Addy, point of order.
Mr Speaker, you may remember on the 23rd of April I raised a PMQ about blood donations and people being turned away for low haemoglobin. But the week before I'd put down some PQs about diversity and blood deferrals, and I found when I got the responses back that up to 70% of black people were being turned away when they were going to give blood donations because of low haemoglobin levels. I made steps to raise this with the Minister directly in a meeting 2 weeks prior, and there were leaders from the NHS blood and transplant services there, and just a few days afterwards, they pulled the answers to the questions that I had presented to them. Now, on their own website, they actually state that they can only meet the RO blood type 50% of the time. So black blood donations are extremely important. And now since the 12th of May, Mr Speaker, for 6 to 7 weeks, I've been trying to get answers to my questions that they said were incorrect. I've been writing to ministers, to the NHSBT, and the best the NHSBT could do today was to send me a letter to say they were sorry and they would give it to me next week. That is outrageous. They were talking about quality of data, and if any agency should look at their quality of data, given the important service that they provide, it should be the NHSBT. And I have a number of other questions, but they need to understand how much everybody is doing. A few weeks ago, Mr Speaker, we actually had, it was International Blood Donation Week, and people across the country donated so much, the website crashed. And people are doing their bit, and the NHBC are not doing theirs.
Well, one of us is going to have to give way.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I first of all want to reassure the Honourable Lady, I am very, very concerned. I'm very concerned about questions not being answered in a reasonable amount of time. I think it is totally unacceptable. It is totally unacceptable to give the wrong answers. For the department not to take seriously these questions, I take them very seriously. I know the Honourable Lady would not bring this as a point of order if she hadn't got real concerns. I know the genuine concerns, something I'm very concerned about. I know she will keep in touch with me. What I would say is, I think with what she's got to say, she ought to maybe consider putting in for an adjournment debate where this could be stuck more widely. I think that will be a good way, and I'm sure that we can help through the table office. But if the answers aren't forthcoming, please come back to me, either another point of order, but I really do think I would impress that she ought to consider an adjournment debate, because I really do genuinely believe that this needs to be heard. And I do recognise that many members from different sides of the House are also struggling to get questions answered and letters. It is not acceptable, and I will say to different government departments, get on with the job that you're there to do, and that's looking after the backbenches of this House. Right, we now come to a presentation of Bill. Callum Miller.
Armed Forces Deployment Outside the UK Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 11th of July.
Friday the 11th of July. Right, presentation of Bill. Max Wilkinson.
Festivals Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 11th of July.
Friday the 11th of July. Right. We now come to 10 minutes rule motion, and we've got Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given in this House to bring in a bill to make provision for the general public to require and petition that the Criminal Cases Review Commission should review cases where the petitioners believe that sentences handed down are either too lenient or too harsh, and to make provision also for the review of such sentences and to make provision for the referral of such cases by the Commission to the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, and for connected purposes, Mr. Speaker. And before looking at the provisions itself, I would ask you, Mr. Speaker, to join me in a journey of imagination to a distant, respected democracy, where there is an elected leader of this democracy, where there is an independent judiciary, respected, where there is a respected legal system, and where there historically has been confidence amongst the people of this democracy for this judicial and legal system. But then imagine that a bad event occurs, and the elected leader of that distant democracy effectively instructs the judiciary to impose the harshest of possible sentences on potential transgressors. The consequence of which is that, imagine someone in a fit of anger puts out an offensive, inappropriate, bad tweet for a few hours, calms down, apologises and withdraws that online information and tweet. But is then, because of that tweet, is then charged and sentenced in a very serious way. Potentially, Mr. Speaker, a sentence of some 31 months that might be significantly more than the sentence given to a shoplifter, a robber, a mugger, a drug dealer, and the like. And the thing about the confidence in a legal system is the comparativeness of sentences. And imagine, Mr. Speaker, that that individual, whilst in prison, is allegedly the recipient of some violent maltreatment in prison, including being manhandled to the ground, handcuffed to the point where bruises 5 days later are significantly present on their hands. Imagine them being then dragged up not one, not two, but up 3 flights of stairs to the naughty girls' wing, as opposed to having been a model prisoner, having been promised to be taken to the good girls' wing. This is, of course, the consequence in a distant democracy where you think this cannot surely be valid. But, Mr. Speaker, it is with regret that I must bring you back to the reality of the situation, that actually this is the United Kingdom, and in the last few months this has occurred. And that is why I bring this Criminal Cases Review Bill to the House under the 10-minute rule bill. What's known outside this House, Mr. Speaker, as Lucy's Bill, because confidence in our judicial system and the sentences that are handed out is absolutely vital. I believe that the public, they want to trust our system, but justice works when it is natural and fair and decent, and the public believe that sentences are appropriate. If we lose that, then potentially, Mr. Speaker, we lose everything. And therefore, look, we're all human. Even noble, experienced, wise judges can get things wrong. And there is a system of appeal. But maybe what we need, Mr. Speaker, and that's why the provisions of this bill are so important, maybe the public would have ever more confidence in a vibrant democracy, in our justice system, if it was like a system of a treble check, safeguard of the sentences, so that without being able to impinge on the original judgment that is following a case, but that actually, let's say, Mr. Speaker, that 500 members of the public, if they signed a petition to ask the Criminal Cases Review Commission to reconsider the sentence, and if they felt within 8 weeks that that sentence may be too lenient or too harsh, that they could then refer it to an appropriate court. I think that would give an extra level of trust and confidence in the fairness and the comparative appropriateness of sentences within our system. And the responses, I believe, Mr. Speaker, is that people would feel that this is a democracy and a justice system that works for all, with the appropriate safeguards. And it is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, that I bring this bill to the House. And I believe that it is worthy of further debate, consideration and discussion. I thank you.
The honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Mr. Speaker, Nigel Farage, Lee Anderson, Sarah Pochin, James McMurdoch and myself.
Richard Tice.
Criminal Cases Review Public Petition Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 11th of July.
Friday the 11th of July. Right, we now come to the motion on the estimate for the Ministry of Justice. I call the Minister to move the motion formally.
Formally.
The question is, as on the order paper, the debate will be opened by the Chair of the Justice Committee, Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thanks to the Backbench Business Committee for allowing time for this important debate on the spending of the Ministry of Justice on criminal justice. An effective criminal justice system is vital to the proper functioning of a democratic society. An ineffective criminal justice system presents grave risks for both social and economic stability. We are at a pivotal moment for the health of our criminal justice system, with prisons operating at close to full capacity, coupled with a backlog in the Crown Courts of over 74,000 cases. Investment and reform are required. The Ministry of Justice suffered some of the most severe budget cuts of any department during the years of Tory austerity. In 2023-24, its resource expenditure level was 11% less than what it had been in 2010-11 in real terms. I would therefore like to welcome the Labour government's investment in the criminal justice system, announced through the main estimates and also through the spending review. The main estimates confirmed that the MOJ's day-to-day spending is set to increase by 793 million, or 6.5%, which includes further investment in the Prisons and Probation Service and in the Courts and Tribunal Service. The MOJ's investment capital spending is also set to increase by 351 million, or over 20%, largely driven by investment in creating new prison places and major projects to maintain court capacity and invest in digital systems and security measures. The spending review also announced the following. £7 billion will be allocated between 2024-25 and 2029-30 to support the delivery of 14,000 urgently needed new prison places by 2031. An increase of up to 700 million a year for the probation service by 2028-29, compared with 2025-26. This is especially important given the recommendations made by David Gauke's independent sentencing review, which I'll come on to in a moment. and up to £450 million a year in additional investment in the court system by 2028-29, aimed at increasing Crown Court sitting days and implementing the forthcoming recommendations from Sir Brian Levison's independent review of criminal courts, which is set to deliver its first report next month. Combining the estimates and the spending review presents a largely positive picture for investment in the MOJ. The estimate for resource expenditure in 2025-26 is 14% more than the spending plans for 2024-25. This increase may help to offset some of the underfunding the department was subject to in the 2010s. The estimate for capital expenditure in 25-26 is 32% more than the plans for the year 24-25. This will be a record high level of capital expenditure for the MOJ over the course of a financial year. It remains to be seen, however, whether this funding will be enough to address the challenges the criminal justice system faces. In the interest of time, I will focus my speech on the three key areas: prisons and probation, the courts, and legal aid. His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, HMPPS, is the largest body within the MOJ in terms of expenditure. It makes up 47% of the MOJ's day-to-day spending budget, and in the 25-26 main estimate, will make up 82% of its planned capital spending. The prison population has more than doubled over the last 30 years, and it stands at around 88,000. It continues to grow year on year and is at a record high. If things continue as they are, the prison population will be 93,500 by September 2026 and over 100,000 by September 2028, for which there will not be sufficient places. The MOJ cites the following reasons for these increases: increase in police charging activity and flows into the courts, increase in people on remand, who now make up an astonishing 20% of the prison population, and changes in sentencing policy, which keep the more serious offenders in prison for much longer. I welcome the Lord Chancellor's commitment to build 14,000 prison places by 2031. I hope this will ensure that emergency measures, such as SDS 40, which saw prisoners released automatically after having served 40% of their sentences last year, do not have to be used again. It is in the context of the prison's capacity crisis that the government commissioned the sentencing review conducted by David Gauke, which reported last month, and Mr Gauke gave evidence to the committee last week. Many of the review's recommendations have been accepted in principle by the government. These include recommendations for a new model of sentencing called the earned progression model, which could see some prisoners who are serving fixed-term sentences released after serving a third of their sentence, dependent on their behaviour. This recommendation and others within the review are aimed at making greater use of non-custodial sentences and therefore attempting to reduce the prison population. I look forward to seeing the detail of how these recommendations will be implemented in the forthcoming sentencing bill. Non-custodial sentences will place an additional burden on the already struggling probation service, to which I will now turn. But could I just, before I do that, just issue a cautionary note? Even if David Gauke's recommendations are wholly successful, the prisons will still be full, and this has unintended consequences. It means, for example, that prisoners have to be slotted into places where they become available. Rehabilitation is more difficult. Some prisoners, as Sky News reported recently, are put into lower category prisons, C and D category, years before they should have done in terms of their sentence planning. And the prison escort service, which is already in a pretty parlous state, is often bringing prisoners late to court because they are not available in their local prisons. So anything that can be done for effective community punishment and rehabilitation is clearly good. Of course I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. With 80% of offenders being re-offenders, doesn't that show that our current system is really very broken and that we need a different approach? And would my honourable friend agree that the opportunities that we have in the sentencing review could keep our community safer by properly addressing re-offending?
My honourable friend, who is very knowledgeable on these issues, is absolutely right. and we are relying on the Gork review to do, or the implementation of its recommendations, to do two things. Firstly, to make sure there is capacity in the prisons for the growing number of people who are being sentenced in our courts, but also, in the longer term, to reduce down prison numbers by effective rehabilitation. Now, that can take place in prisons, but not in overcrowded prisons on the whole. But it can take place more effectively in the community by way of getting people back into normal daily life, which prison certainly isn't. But let me get on that in that vein, continue by talking about the probation service. And I say it will receive an additional £700 million per year to support the reforms in the sentencing review. That's a substantial increase in funding, which is intended to enable probation to supervise more people in the community and expand electronic tagging. The probation service currently manages 240,000 individuals on court order or licence. Worryingly, in last year's annual report, Inspector of Probation labelled 10 local probation services as requires improvement and 14 as inadequate. It's identified staffing challenges, unmanageable workloads, deficits in casework, and insufficient management of risk, public protection, and safeguarding. However, it also found outstanding statutory victim work, commitment and vision from staff, and some good partnership working, and that's something the committee has seen itself on its visit to probation services. I would, however, like to raise my particular concern around the ability of the current electronic tagging provider, Serco, to deal with the dramatic increase in demand on their services that will inevitably result from the sentencing bill. The committee has been in frequent correspondence with the Prisons Minister to raise our concerns regarding the poor performance of Serco. This has also been highlighted by Channel 4 and their dispatches programme. The committee has identified several issues with management of the tagging contract, including substantial delays to the fitting of tags, even to serious offenders. We were shocked to learn that financial penalties have been levied on Serco every month since they took on the service in May 2024. It's unclear to me how Serco will be able to deal with increased demand given their unacceptable performance when managing the electronic tagging service at its current level. I'd like to briefly say something about the conditions in the prison estate. In 2023, HM Chief Inspector of Prisons Charlie Taylor said that 1 in 10 prisons should be closed down. He stated that around 14 Victorian jails were so poorly designed, overcrowded and ill-equipped they could not provide proper accommodation for prisoners. Last year, 63% of prisoners reported overcrowding. This is often with 2 or more prisoners in a cell which was designed for 1 person with no private toilet facilities. Drugs are an increasing problem in prison. The committee has covered this extensively in its Tackling Drugs in Prison inquiry, which is due to report shortly. Between April 2023 and April 2024, there were almost 50,000 adults aged 18 and over in alcohol and drug treatment in prisons and secure settings. That's a 7% rise compared with the previous year. In the 12 months to December 2024, there were 10,600 assaults on prison staff. Violence is also on the increase in prison, and that's partly the result of the unpredictable environment created by the abundance of drugs that are available. That's equivalent to 122 assaults per 1,000 prisoners, which is an increase of 13% from the previous years. It's the highest number of assaults on prison staff recorded in 1 year. The use of force by prison officers and rates of self-harm among prisoners have also been increasing in recent years. Self-harm was 10% higher in 2024 than in 2023. Overcrowding, increased drug use, violence and self-harm contribute towards a distressing environment within prisons in which the vital function of prisons to rehabilitate offenders can be almost impossible in some institutions. We are undertaking a major inquiry into rehabilitation and resettlement, which will, I hope, shed more light on these troubling pictures. And beyond all this, we have the continuing scandal of IPP prisoners and there has to be, and I recommend to the Minister the report published this week by the Howard League on a new approach to IPP prisoners, which would serve to reduce the numbers continuing in custody substantially. Let me turn to the court service and HMCTS, which is the second largest body within the MOJ. In the government's main estimate for 25-26, spending on HMCTS accounted for 21% of planned resource spending and 12% of capital spending. The current backlog of outstanding cases in the Crown Court stands at around 74,000. This is a result of a number of factors, one of which is the shortage of criminal lawyers driven by low legal aid pay rates and poor working conditions. The backlog in the courts is detrimental to the lives of thousands of people. Victims, witnesses and defendants alike are forced to wait in limbo for justice. Yes,
I'm grateful to the honourable and learned gentleman for giving way. He raises an important point around court backlogs, but another factor is of course, having the appropriate magistrates, legal advisors, etc., to hear these cases. The Magistrates Association have raised concerns that the spending review is insufficient to tackle that. Does he share their concerns?
I do share those concerns. I don't have time, because I only want to take a few more minutes with my speech to go into what is happening in the magistrates' courts as well. It's a debate for another day, but shortage of magistrates, shortage of legal clerks, low pay rates across HMCTS is clearly one of the factors which is meaning that we cannot get to grips with this backlog, even though I've no doubt the government wishes to do that. I welcome the Lord Chancellor's allocation of 110,000 sitting days in the Crown Court for 25-26, the highest sitting day allocation made since HMCTS was created and the biggest financial settlement ever made for the Crown Court. I hope this is enough to make some reduction in the backlog. However, I note that the allocation is below the 113,000 days that the Lady Chief Justice told the committee the Crown Court could sit for in the last financial year. And there have been similar increases in sitting days for other courts, including the Magistrates' Court, which will sit for up to 114,000 days a year. The government have acknowledged the allocation of days is not enough on its own to severely reduce the backlog in the Crown Courts, and that more radical reform is required. So I welcome Sir Brian Levison's independent review of criminal courts, which will propose options for both short-term and long-term reforms aimed at ensuring cases are dealt with proportionately in light of current pressures on the Crown Court, and will explore how the courts could operate as efficiently as possible. I look forward to the first report of the review, which I think I said is due to be published next month. Finally, I'd like to conclude by briefly touching on the role of the Legal Aid Agency. In terms of expenditure, the LAA is the third largest body within MOJ. Its day-to-day budget was around 0.9 billion, and made up 8% of the MOJ's total resource budget. But between 2010 and 23-24, resource expenditure on legal aid decreased by 2% in cash terms and 31% in real terms. And I was surprised to see the spending review did not include a specific funding allocation for the Legal Aid Agency, with the only reference to it being in the context of potential efficiency savings the MOJ will be making in the review period. There have been concerns raised about the sustainability of the criminal legal aid sector in terms of the number of legal aid firms and the number of solicitors and barristers practicing in this area. In March 2025, the Law Society said that the number of criminal duty solicitors had fallen by 26% since 2017, and this may in the future leave many individuals unable to access their rights to a solicitor and free advice. So while I welcome the MOJ's announcements made in December 2024 for an additional 92 million per year for criminal aid solicitors, I look forward to seeing the results of their consultation on this, it may well not be enough. And indeed, the 15% uplift in criminal barristers' fees as a consequence of the Bellamy review took so long to come in and was so far overtaken by other increases in cost that again needs to be looked at in the near future if we sustain the criminal bar. I note with concern... I'll take one more intervention.
I'm grateful to my honourable member for giving way. On the subject of lack of legal aid solicitors and barristers, does my friend agree with me that that is only going to compound the problems of the court backlog, given that cases will either have to be adjourned as a consequence of lack of legal counsel, or where defendants are appearing without legal counsel, those cases tend to take longer because the very nature of it is that those defendants will need more time and support by the court, the other court services. And is my honourable friend concerned about that?
Yeah, well, this is already happening. Non-availability of counsel, whether that be CPS or defence counsel, is already one of the main reasons for ineffective trials. So I'm hoping when the Minister responds, we will hear something about that and the government's plans to alleviate it. I just want to briefly mention the cyber attack that the Legal Aid Agency was subject to in April. It's revealed serious concerns regarding the robustness of government-managed digital services and the protection of sensitive data. It holds risks for the day-to-day operation of the justice system, and I think that we will need, not today perhaps, but soon, the further statement the Courts Minister promised in relation to the steps that are being taken to recover that position. And I will say that the committee will be conducting its own inquiry into access to justice, beginning with a call to evidence this summer. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to conclude by re-emphasising the importance of the criminal justice system plays in the proper functioning of our society. Out of sight is not all, it should not be out of mind in this respect. I do appreciate the steps that this government is taking and the struggle and the task that it has going forward, but there is so much to do that we need to get on with this in a speedy fashion. And very finally, let me just say thank you to all those who work in the criminal justice system. Those who risk their lives and their safeties at the front line, prison officers, probation officers, those who keep the system running, judges, barristers, court staff. Across the piece, we see people going above and beyond because of the situation that the system has been left in. And I would just like to say that I'm sure this is one point that we write both sides of the House, that we all appreciate the work that goes on every day to keep people safe and to ensure that justice is done.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor substantially increased the budget of the Ministry of Justice in the spending review from £11.9 billion in 23-24 to £15.6 billion in 28-29. We're told this is a real terms increase of 3.1% over 5 years. It is our duty in this place not just to applaud ever larger sums of money being spent, but also to scrutinise that that money is spent well and to ensure it represents good value for money for the taxpayer. There is no question that the criminal justice system is under strain. I trust the Lord Chancellor will do her best to ensure that she uses the money wisely to fix the various problems the Chairman of the Select Committee has described. One of the biggest problems facing the criminal justice system is the Crown Court backlog. As of the end of 2024, there were almost 75,000 cases awaiting trial. This is an increase on the figure when the Lord Chancellor took office, and the figure is projected to rise further. Justice delayed is justice denied. Witnesses' memories fade and victims feel that they've been forgotten. Now, I appreciate that much of this rise was caused by the pandemic, and we're still dealing with the fallout. But the Lord Chancellor must do more to reduce that backlog. While there is more money for the courts as part of the spending review, we need to ensure it is effectively deployed. The government says it is a priority, yet we still have empty courtrooms. When the Lady Chief Justice came to Parliament last November, she offered 6,500 additional sitting days. Can the Minister explain why the Lord Chancellor did not accept every single one of those extra days that was offered? The Lord Chancellor must use the additional money she has been given to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of both the Crown and magistrates' courts, and to reduce the backlogs. The justice system also faces a lack of prison spaces. Now, the Gork review, commissioned by the Lord Chancellor, has effectively recommended the ending of short prison sentence in favour of community sentences. About half of admissions to prison are for sentences of less than 12 months. The Howard League says that about 30,000 people a year are sentenced to 6 months or less. So, setting aside for one moment as to whether this is the right policy, which I doubt, if it is implemented by the government, it will require a very large increase in the number of probation officers. Happy to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and while he talks about probation and prison places, does he share my concern that it's all very well for the government to announce £7 billion to deliver prison places by 2031, which is 6 years away, while 16,000 prisoners are walking the streets because they were released early by this government? What's going to happen in the next 6 years? More prisoners released early while we wait for these prison places?
Sir Ashley Fox.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I think the danger is that the public lose confidence in the criminal justice system if prisoners are released so early. As I mentioned, there is already a shortfall of nearly 2,000 probation officers. In fact, there are now 200 fewer probation officers than when Labour took office. So if the government intends to go ahead with this plan, we need to know how they plan to recruit the additional probation officers that they will need. What is their plan? Because if they go ahead with abolishing short sentences, those community sentences are going to have to be seen to be really tough and worthwhile by the public if the criminal justice system is to retain confidence. And I fear that the government doesn't have a plan for that. While we see there is more money in the budget allocated for prison and probation services, we do not get any detail about what this means in terms of recruiting those extra probation officers. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could address that. I would also ask the government to look at other methods of alleviating the strain on prison places that do not involve additional expenditure. For example, by deporting foreign national offenders. There are currently 11,000 foreign offenders in our prisons, but our record on deporting them remains poor. Only 3,500 of them were deported last year, and too many are still able to avoid deportation by using the ECHR. This needs to change. Now, the government has said that they will review the right to family life being used in appeals in serious cases related to asylum seekers who have been convicted of sexual offences. I welcome that. But we need to go much further. In my view, we should deport all foreign national offenders at the end of their sentences and disapply the Human Rights Act. The obvious way, in the longer term, to make sure we have enough prison spaces is actually to build more prisons. And during the general election campaign, the party opposite promised to build 20,000 additional places. But in the years since they took office, little progress has been made. And it has been revealed recently that they have actually cut hundreds of millions of pounds from the capital budget to cover the cost of pay increases for staff and the imposition of the Chancellor's jobs tax. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is always tempting to welcome an increase in a department's budget, but we need to make sure that the spending is matched by proper accountability and proper planning. We cannot afford for this new funding to be simply absorbed by the justice bureaucracy. So will the Minister explain how much of the extra money his department has been allocated will go in additional national insurance charges, wage rises and inflation? It is simply not credible to make countless promises in opposition or on the campaign trail, only to quietly shelve those when in office. So we on this side will hold the government to account for the commitments they have given. Thank you.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank my good friend, the Chair of the Justice Committee and Member for Hammersmith and Chiswick, for his excellent speech and for securing this debate today. And I am grateful for the opportunity to speak in today's debate. And I declare my interest as Chair of the APPG Miscarriage of Justice. And I welcome the estimate and the commitment from the spending review. But I want to focus my remarks on an area of grave concern: the Ministry of Justice spending on criminal justice, and more specifically, to adequately prevent and correct miscarriages of justice. What is the value of justice if innocent people are still being convicted, imprisoned and left to rot in our criminal justice system? The sad truth is that for all the billions we are debating today, the Ministry is failing in one of its most fundamental duties: to ensure that innocent people are protected from wrongful conviction and supported when the system fails them. Miscarriages of justice are not theoretical, they're real and ongoing, and they destroy lives. Andrew Malkinson, wrongfully imprisoned for 17 years for a crime he did not commit, exonerated last year, but only after a tortuous journey through a system that was more interested in protecting itself than uncovering the truth. Peter Sullivan, wrongfully convicted of murder, spent 38 years in prison before being exonerated only last month. He is a victim of the longest miscarriage of justice involving a living prisoner in British legal history. And these cases expose deep systemic flaws and happened in plain sight. But across the country, we have individuals experiencing criminalisation and injustice without proper recourse. Their names not always making the headlines, but their stories are no less important. Miscarriages of justice are not rare accidents. They are now, sadly, an inevitable consequence of a failing system stripped of its checks and balances. At the heart of that system is the Criminal Cases Review Commission, a body that was designed to be the safety net, to identify where the system had gone wrong and to help innocent people find justice. Yet the CCRC is in crisis. In May, the Justice Select Committee published a damning indictment of the Commission's leadership and performance. It stated that the CCRC had shown, and I quote, a remarkable inability to learn from its own mistakes, and that it had deteriorated significantly in its ability to fulfil its vital function. The committee concluded that root and branch reform is required, and in the clearest possible terms, it found that it was untenable for the current Chief Executive, Karen Neller, to remain in post. This is not political rhetoric. This is a cross-party committee of this House carrying out its scrutiny function and reaching deeply troubling conclusions. The CCRC's failures come at a terrible cost, not only to those wrongfully convicted, but to public confidence in the rule of law. Every year, it fails to identify miscarriages. Innocent people remain behind bars, their lives on hold, or worse, permanently destroyed. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to acknowledge a step in the right direction. I welcome the appointment of Dame Vera Baird-Casey as the interim chair of the CCRC. Dame Vera has a long and respected record of championing justice and accountability, and I hope her leadership marks a turning point, and I look forward to seeing real progress made, not just in leadership, but in culture, performance and independence. But for that to happen, the government must take responsibilities seriously. Reform cannot come on the cheap. The CCRC must be properly resourced and empowered to do the job it was created to do, because until we properly fund our safeguards, miscarriages of justice will continue, the human cost will remain unbearable and the financial cost unsustainable. I also quickly want to touch on two areas that are critical to justice: legal aid and forensic sciences. Since 2010, funding has been slashed by hundreds of millions, and access to justice and representation is now a postcode lottery. We are seeing the collapse of criminal defence provision across England and Wales. There are now entire areas with no local legal aid solicitors. Disproportionately affects those from marginalised groups, those most vulnerable to miscarriages of justice. And forensic science, once the gold standard, has been fragmented and degraded. A 3-year inquiry set up by the APPG on miscarriage of justice into forensics has recently concluded that the sector is in a graveyard spiral, leading to poor police investigations, increasing unsolved crimes and more wrongful convictions. Evidence shows that our system is continuing to fail, not only to ensure the prevention of miscarriages of justice, but their speedy identification and resolution when they do occur. We support calls for a full national order of forensic provision to assess the urgent support needed to prevent further decline and to protect future investigations and trials from preventable failure. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like now to talk about prisons and the chronic underfunding that is failing both staff and those in custody. At the Justice Union's parliamentary group yesterday, I heard first-hand about the crisis in prison education. And according to Ofsted, 82% of prisons and young offender institutions are rated inadequate or requiring improvement for education, skills and work provision. Prison educators are paid less than their counterparts in the wider FE sector. The Education Select Committee warned in 2022 that poor pay, unsafe working environments and lack of respect have driven a recruitment and retention crisis. And this is unacceptable. Education is one of the most powerful tools for rehabilitation. Yet we are underfunding and undervaluing the very people delivering it. And the same is true of prison maintenance. Privatisation has been a costly failure. Basic repairs go unmet, squalor is widespread, and maintenance backlog is now estimated at nearly £2 billion. And I support the POA's Bring It Back campaign for insourcing prison maintenance. The promised biggest wave of insourcing in a generation must start here. In our crumbling prisons, where failed contracts have left dangerous and decaying conditions for both staff and prisoners. I also want to express my support to the POA's campaign on retirement age. Asking officers to work until they're 68 is such a high-stress, high-risk environment is simply unsustainable. 68 is simply too late. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are debating how to spend £18 billion in the Ministry of Justice, but money alone is not the issue. It's about priorities, because if the very foundations of justice are crumbling, then every other investment is undermined. The criminal justice system continues to fail innocent people. Chronic underfunding has rendered safeguards weak and ineffective. Leadership has been absent where it was most needed, and time and again the system refuses to admit when it gets things wrong. Miscarriages of justice are not tragic accidents. They are the inevitable consequence of a system that is under-resourced, poorly led and structurally resistant to scrutiny. Every wrongful conviction is not just a personal tragedy, it is a betrayal of our legal system and the value it claims to uphold, because justice denied to one is justice denied to all. So let us invest not just in buildings, but in truth, not just in processes, but in people, and above all, let us put real justice, not convenience, not cost-cutting, at the heart of everything the Ministry of Justice does. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Pam Cox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise today as the Member of Parliament for Colchester, as a member of the Justice Select Committee, and as the recently elected Chair of the APPG Penal Affairs, and I declare my interest in relation to that APPG. This estimate for the Ministry of Justice proposes a 6.5% increase in day-to-day spending and a 20.8% increase in capital investment, and that is a very welcome set of figures. Necessary, of course, because this government inherited a crisis from the last, a crisis across the criminal justice system, in our courts, in our prisons and in our probation services. Let's begin with the courts, and as my honourable friend, the Chair of the Justice Committee, has outlined, the Crown Court backlog stands at over 74,000 cases. That's double the level in 2019. Victims are waiting years for justice. The increase in sitting days and investment in digital infrastructure are a necessary first step. As a member of the Select Committee, I visited our courts where dedicated public servants are working very hard, despite these challenges, to deliver justice for victims, but we need bold reform. And I welcome look forward to the recommendations from Sir Brian Levison's review, which we all hope will indeed be bold. Justice system too often appears to be stuck in a bygone age. Turning to our prisons, we all see the failures of the last government laid bare, a failure to plan for the long term in prison places, a failure to rehabilitate prisoners and a failure to prevent reoffending. Prison population now exceeds 87,000 people, with projections suggested it could reach over 100,000 by 2028. That means overcrowding is rife, 24% of prisoners are held in crowded conditions, and the maintenance backlog is now ballooned to 1.8 billion. You can't have effective rehabilitation in a prison system that is so overcrowded. Time and again, we've heard on this Select Committee of poor contract management and a failure around transparency and value for money across a whole range of contracts, from education to maintenance to drug and alcohol services. And I hope that the new Procurement Act will vitally tighten up those essential processes. The Procurement Act has to be fit for purpose, and if procurement isn't fit for purpose, prisons will not be fit for purpose. The government's 10-year prison capacity strategy promises 14,000 new places, and that's compared to just 500 constructed under the last government over those 14 wasted years. So we cannot build our way, however, out of this crisis alone, as my honourable friend has said. We also need a smarter approach to sentencing and rehabilitation. So I welcome also then the Justice Secretary's commitment to the earned progression model and the expansion of community-based alternatives. Earned progression must be matched with access to decent prison programmes in health, education, well-being and so on, so that progression is indeed earned and helps offenders to really turn their lives around and thereby protects the public and victims from harm. I'll proceed if I may. Those reforms must be matched by investment in probation. Probation service is under severe strain, as we've heard. Many local services rated as inadequate and services staff turnover still too high. There's a £700 million fund earmarked for probation. That's a very good start, but we must ensure it delivers real measurable improvement in those reoffending rates. I'd like to say a brief word on legal aid. Expenditure on legal aid is down 31% in real terms since 2010, and that's hollowing out access to justice. Recent commitments to increase funding for solicitors and youth court work are welcome, but I would echo comments made on this side of the House that we need to go further on legal aid where possible. A justice system that only works for those who can afford it is no justice system at all. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, this estimate reflects a government that recognises the scale of the challenge. Secretary of State and her ministerial team have worked extremely hard to deliver this increase in funding. The last government lost control of the courts, prison and probation, and these measures will go some way to putting that right so that we can all once again have faith in our justice system. Thank you.
Lindsay Farnsworth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise also as a member of the Justice Select Committee and a former prosecutor who worked within the criminal justice system. Madam Deputy Speaker, today is an opportunity not only to examine the Ministry of Justice's estimates for the coming year, but to assess whether our criminal justice system is being resourced to meet the scale of the challenges it faces and to make our communities safer. And I want to talk particularly about the sentencing review and the impact of that on resourcing, particularly for the probation service. Now, we know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we inherited a system that was on the brink of collapse. The 2024 report on prison population growth revealed that England and Wales had the highest per capita prison population in Western Europe. This was a crisis that our government had to respond to immediately upon entering office. And my right honourable friend, the Justice Secretary's temporary early release scheme was a difficult but necessary decision to protect the justice system from breaking altogether and ensure that dangerous offenders were not turned away at the door due to lack of court space. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. She referred to the early release scheme as temporary. Is she 100% confident that it's a temporary scheme and the government won't be releasing more prisoners over the next few years?
Lindsay Farnsworth.
Well, what I would say in that regard is that we inherited a particularly drastic situation which isn't going to be turned around overnight. So we will take the important measures. I'm sure the Minister will speak on behalf of the government, but I expect the government will take the difficult decisions on an ongoing basis until we're in a better position. And that may have to be something that is reviewed in due course. I don't speak for the government in that regard, but I do trust them to make sure that our members of the public are safe and that there are places available by whatever means that they need to make sure that dangerous criminals can be put in jail. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must now move beyond this crisis, however, into crisis management, as it were. The mission-driven Labour government is investing to deliver 14,000 new prison places by 2031, and my honourable friend, the member for Colchester, was quite right in pointing out that contrasts quite starkly with the 500 prison places that were created across a 14-year period under the last government. However, it is clear that the solution to overcrowding cannot be simply to build more prisons, but instead lies in the breaking of the cycle of reoffending.
As members of the Select Committee, you'll want to be accurate in what you're saying in relation to prison places.
A moment, Mr. Munn. There's no you in the chamber. You're talking through the chair. Dr. Munn.
Speaker, I know the member will want to be accurate in what the member is saying in relation to prison places. Does the member accept that we created 13,000 prison places during our time in office?
I recognise that prison places were created, but we're talking in net terms. So in net terms, there was 500 extra.
Yeah, it's nothing to be proud of.
Certainly not happy with only 500 net over 14-year period. Absolutely not. And that's why this government is taking action to increase prison places in real terms. Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to sort out the cycle of reoffending, which places a massive strain on the system. Almost 60% of those receiving a prison sentence of 12 months or less reoffended within a year. And in these instances, focusing on what happens after her crime has been committed is the best way to prevent future offending. We don't need a justice system that is bigger, but one that is fairer and more effective. Our ambition and reforms to make our streets safer cannot be met by enforcement alone. They must be backed by proper sustained funding, particularly to support the probation service, which lies at the heart of a functioning and fair justice system. This takes me back to a project that I was involved in the early 2000s, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I was proud to be involved in that in Nottingham. It was the Community Justice Initiative under the last Labour government's Respect agenda. Yes, I am that old, Madam Deputy Speaker, to remember that.
Order. For the record, I did not comment on the lady's age. Continue.
Indeed, Madam, and I'm very grateful that you didn't. I'm very conscious of my own self. Madam, the Community Justice Initiative brought the community into the justice process. It facilitated community impact statements for certain offences such as antisocial behaviour and took a holistic approach to sentencing which aimed to tackle drivers of offending, including drug misuse, unemployment and poor education. Now, despite the initiative working, it was unfortunately short-lived because ultimately it lacked the resources and funding in the longer term for it to be sustainable. And just like the Community Justice Initiative, the reforms that are set out in the first year of this government offers enormous promise. Now, I don't have a glass ball and I certainly don't claim to be able to see into the future, but as we look ahead to the Ministry's prescribed spending for the following year, it seems that as ever, there are two possible scenarios before us. In the first, we learn from the past. In the second, we repeat its mistakes. And I ask the Minister, and if I can be clear today, we cannot allow history to repeat itself. This cannot happen. We must not allow ourselves to return to a crisis point because we are unable to resource the very initiatives which will help us reform the justice system. As a prosecutor, I saw the same individuals pass through the courts again and again, and how this cycle of reoffending devastated lives, clogged up the courts and cost the taxpayer millions. I therefore wholeheartedly welcome the shift from short prison sentences, proven to do little to reduce reoffending, towards community sentences, which get to the real root of the offending behaviour. I'm pleased that we now have a research-based sentencing review which can reduce this problem, which can work to reduce this problem and tackle crime at its cause. But it must be financed in a sustained and long-term manner if it is to succeed. The probation service stands at a crossroads and its future will be decided by the adequacy of resourcing, staffing and funding. The government has promised that it will receive an increase of up to £700 million per year to support the reforms set out in the independent sentencing review by 2028-29. And the Minister for Prisons, Parole and Probation has set a target for 1,300 probation staff to be recruited in the next year. The Ministry of Justice's budget for 25-26 shows other welcome increases, including nearly £800 million more in day-to-day spending, 523 million of which allocated to prisons and probation, and there's a huge 32% increase in capital expenditure. But Minister, the justice system has suffered from years of underfunding and under-resourcing, which has resulted in overcrowding and overburdening. Justice reform is about protecting communities, supporting victims and giving offenders the opportunity to transform their lives and reintegrate into society. If we are to avoid a return to the crisis we inherited, the probation service must receive the resources that it desperately needs. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Contribution, Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We who knock on doors week in, week out know all too well a trend that has grown over recent years, that every display of incompetence, every proof of national decline, every sign of political self-interest for the Conservatives has damaged, indeed hollowed out public trust in the ability of our democracy to get things done. The public has had its fill, and in few other policy areas, and with no other political party, have they seen such incompetence, such decline and such self-interest as with the criminal justice system and as with the Conservatives. It was the Conservatives who melted our criminal justice system. It was the Conservatives who lost control of the security of our communities. It was the Conservatives who clung to hopeless policies. It's not an exaggeration to say that in crashing the criminal justice system, the Conservatives did more harm to our country's faith in democracy and our ability of the state to get things done than we can ever know or quantify. And I do not exaggerate that, because when I knock on doors and people ring up numbers they can't get the police to attend, when they submit crime reports and they don't hear back, when they feel that there's an absence of visible policing on their street, and this is the inheritance that they have given the Labour government, there is a hopelessness in our politics, and we need to reckon with that reality. Our courts are clogged, victims are waiting years for justice, police officers are stretched to the limits, legal aid is hollowed out, and communities do feel unsafe and unheard. Shoplifting, antisocial behaviour and the illegal use of e-scooters and e-bikes are examples of the things that people in our communities raise as examples of local decline to which there are too few police to respond. It's not just a matter of law and order, it's a matter of fairness, decency and safety. And so this Labour government has a challenge in front of it, to put right a criminal justice system that was so fundamentally broken. And I have to say, seeing the opposition, so few in number, laughing at what I'm saying is really disheartening. It's almost like, I will happily give way if he'll apologise for the 14 years of chaos.
I would just gently point out to the member opposite, if you consider the ratio of Labour members to Conservative members and how many people are here today and how many people are on that side, we can be pretty proud of our showing compared to that on your side.
That is so wide of the mark that it is unsurprising that the Conservatives are so floundering in the polls and so unwelcome in our communities. We can and must regain public trust in our criminal justice system. We can and must regain trust in the ability of our democracy to do things. We want a criminal justice system that works for everyone, that protects the public, respects victims, rehabilitates offenders where that is possible, and where it's not possible, locks people up for the appropriate amount of time, that protects the probation service and our prison officers and makes sure that we are able truly to be a secure country again. And so I welcome the announcements by our Labour government to provide 13,000 more police officers, 40 going into my local area, that we're tackling court backlogs by creating more sitting days, something that those who work in the court system in Bournemouth and across BCP have privately told me they welcome, to champion victims' rights. And as somebody who ran a domestic abuse service for 5 years before my election, that's something that matters particularly to me. And I know in this House there are many colleagues who care passionately about tackling domestic violence and also rebuilding our youth services. As somebody who did run a mental health and domestic abuse service, I know the importance of the third sector. So I would make a plea to the Minister that in thinking through how we can rehabilitate those who can be rehabilitated, the third sector has a role to play. With caseworkers, I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that very important point. And would he join me in acknowledging the excellent work of organisations such as Futures Unlocked in Rugby, who I met recently. I met John Powell, the operations manager, and the trustees, and the volunteers. And these small charities do so much work to help ex-prisoners as they transition towards life outside prison. I was hugely impressed, and they're often doing work that the probation service cannot do, despite its best efforts after the 14 years of underfunding under the last government.
I thank my honourable friend for that really important point, and I welcome the work of the charity and the charities in his area, as I welcome the work of charities in all of our areas, because, and he puts his finger on this issue, charities are able to do things that the probation service aren't. They can create trust in people. They can refer that trust onto statutory services. They can provide bespoke support which treats individuals as human beings who are seeking education and skills training, employment support, mental health and addiction support, housing assistance, in some cases the most powerful of support, peer support. And charities in providing that bespoke support can not just help to reduce offending rates, not just help to rehabilitate, not just help to get people into work, but can help to bring down crime rates and the cost to the public purse of our criminal justice system. I will say one point on that too, which is that we need to recognise the link between poverty and exclusion and offending rates. This is not to say that people who grow up in disadvantage ought to commit crime. I want to be very clear about that, but we need to recognise what the evidence shows, which is there is a correlation and a causation, and we need, as a government, therefore, to be tackling the root causes of poverty and exclusion, and in so doing, we can tackle the reasons why people may offend. In closing, I want to thank the Minister for what he's about to say, which I'm sure will be excellent, and I also want to thank honourable members for their contributions. If our democracy feels fragile, it is because of the record of the last government in this area. But if our democracy is to recover, it will be because of the prompt and proportionate action that I believe this government will take, building on the action that it has taken to truly address the challenges that we face. The British people know what they want. They tell us often enough. It's our job to listen. It's our job to provide the competence, the progress and the better outcomes that they're crying out for.
I now come to the front benches and go to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Josh Faberinde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Chair of the Justice Select Committee, working with my honourable friend, the member for Amber Valley, for making the pitch to the Backbench Business Committee to secure this debate. And I also join the Select Committee Chair in thanking the incredible staff who work across our criminal justice system. And if I may add as well, charities like the incredible A Band of Brothers in Eastbourne that work with young ex-offenders across my hometown to tackle crime. Now, the last government, as has been documented in this chamber today, left our criminal justice system in a state. Our prisons were left in crisis, overcrowded with increases in violence and self-harm incidents at their highest levels since records began. Our probation services were left high and dry with an electronic tagging contract that left offenders with violent convictions unmonitored for far too long. Our courts were left dealing with staggeringly high backlogs, with tens of thousands of open cases and victims waiting months, even years, for justice. And of course, as has been mentioned by honourable members, re-offending is through the roof, with 80% of people in our prisons being re-offenders. That's a symbol of more crime, of more victims, and of more misery and harm. And this, of course, carries an enormous price tag too, with re-offending costing society more than £18 billion a year. And the consequences of this dire set of circumstances have been plain for us all to see, but I saw it myself when working in this space before being elected to this House. I spent my career supporting young ex-offenders out of crime and out of gangs in the East End, very far from Eastbourne, in many different ways. And I remember working with a particular young person, and I said to him on his first day of work with us, or ahead of it, to come and wear some smart trousers. And he didn't know what I meant. And he said, "Josh, do you mean court trousers?" And what a sad state of affairs, where a young person in our country has grown up being more accustomed to the criminal justice system than he is our education system. That is a legacy, I'm afraid, of the last government. Another young person I remember working with went into a young offenders institution that was notorious for its issues with violence. He was working with us as a phone repair technician before he went in, and came back when he came out, except he came missing a finger as a result of some of the things that were going on in that place. Again, some of our institutions out of control. And as a victim myself who's been through the criminal justice system, I have experienced what it is like to wait years to have my case heard through an adversarial system that seeks to beat down victims as opposed to support them to rise up. This needs to change. And so I welcome, giving credit where it's due, the investment that this government is making in our criminal justice system through the spending review. But this investment itself is not a silver bullet, and it might not go far enough to right the wrongs of the past. It must be accompanied by reform. And so on courts, there is no mention in the spending review specifically of investing in our crumbling courts that cause so much inefficiency and cost our system, cost victims and cost justice. As my honourable friend from Solihull mentioned, Solihull Western Shirley mentioned earlier in the debate, the Magistrates Association have been particularly concerned about the lack of mention of legal advisors, funding for them in magistrates' courts, which currently, the lack thereof, are resulting in 1 in 10 sittings being cancelled. And on our prisons, while investment has been announced in creating new prison places, no reference to extra funding for women's centres, an alternative to custody. is featured in the spending review, despite this being something that David Gauke recommended in his independent review, and despite charities like Working Chance telling us that women's centres are often at least 10 times more effective at reducing re-offending and cost-effective than the prison system. And on probation, while we welcome the £700 million that has been committed to that service, it's critical, as per the demands of Women's Aid, that some of that cash goes towards mandatory training for probation officers as far as domestic abuse, recognising domestic abuse and protecting survivors of domestic abuse is concerned. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I just wondered on that particular point, the money that goes into the probation system, we're clear, aren't we, that it may not be enough to deal with the scale of the added pressures that's going to be on the probation system. And the Chair's already talked about, I think it was the Chair, forgive me, who talked about contract management, and whether, in fact, the example of Serco is a really good one, where there's going to be much more reliance on electronic tagging, and whether the money is actually going to allow that to happen.
I agree with the point that my honourable friend from Wales and Mendip Hills is making, that this is about much more than just the spend. This is about the efficiency of the spend, and taxpayers deserve far better than what they are getting at the moment from this Serco contract, where, as I said earlier, many offenders are being left without the proper, robust monitoring that victims and survivors and our communities need and deserve. If I come to reoffending, the Gauke review offered many recommendations to unlock supply in our prisons, but it was fairly light on what can be done to stem the demand going into our prisons. And preventing crime and reoffending was the Cinderella of his review, and maybe out of scope in some respects. But it is critical that our criminal justice system is reformed in a holistic way. That's the true means of being able to make our criminal justice system more efficient. And when it comes to victims and survivors, something that was missing from the spending review were commitments around reversing the damaging impact of the national insurance increases for employers. Victims' charities have written to me saying that the increase in those taxes, as well as cuts to Police and Crime Commissioner core budgets, is tantamount to a 7% real terms cut in their budget. That means that victim services are going to be compromised. Victim services not dissimilar to the ISVA services that I once accessed at Survivors UK, and I would urge the government to look again at that. But the status quo, more reoffending and exponentially high cost to the taxpayer, is both immoral and unsustainable. And while these funds, this investment will go some way in reducing backlogs, increasing prison capacity and improving our probation services, there are still vital challenges left unmet. And as I have expressed just this week, in fact yesterday it may have been, directly to the Minister, Liberal Democrats stand ready to work constructively with the government to scrutinise their measures, but to give credit where it's due to help achieve more justice for victims, survivors and our communities.
For the Shadow Minister, Dr. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to respond on behalf of His Majesty's Opposition on this Estimates Day debate on Ministry of Justice expenditure as it relates to criminal justice. Can I thank the Select Committee Chair, the member for Hammersmith and Chiswick, for securing and opening the debate. And I just wanted to say briefly, in Armed Forces Week as we are, those of us who've been involved in the criminal justice system in various guises over the years will know that particularly in our prison service, around a quarter of prison officers will have an armed forces background. So we see in this sector alone the ongoing contribution people from the armed forces community make to our public services in different ways. And it's a pleasure to be able to pay tribute to that on the record today during Armed Forces Week. Moving on, this is of course a very important topic for discussion. Our courts, prisons and probation services are the very bedrock of our criminal justice system. This government has been in charge of these key areas of public expenditure and activity for almost a year now. We've heard from members about the challenges being faced by those in contact with the criminal justice system that remain. We all know that almost from day one, this government has lurched from crisis to crisis, and sadly the Ministry of Justice has not been spared. As we consider the estimates for expenditure and their linked plans to overcome challenges in the criminal justice system, it's of course true to say that we can only have a meaningful debate if we consider the journey we've been on to reach this point. I want to begin by responding to the points that have been raised about the inheritance that this government had. I think that their inheritance can only really be fairly considered when you know what we inherited. What we inherited, and then despite the challenges, what we delivered and what challenges remain. Labour talk about challenging inheritors in the criminal justice system, but what did we face on arriving in office? We've heard a lot in recent months about Labour being forced into early release schemes for prisoners as a sign of the pressures on the system. But what exactly was happening with early release at the end of their time in government? Under the last Labour government, an astonishing 80,000 prisoners were released early. A huge number stopped just before the election for purely political reasons, leaving us to pick up the pieces in the prison estate that we inherited. During our 14 years in office, we released just 6% of that figure. If the numbers they say they've been forced to release since they came in office a barometer of failure, what exactly do members opposite make of the scale of releasing 80,000 prisoners after more than a decade in charge? Perhaps they had a good excuse for releasing that many prisoners early. Maybe this happened because Labour had been spending time rightly toughening up sentencing for the worst offenders during their time in office. I'm afraid not. In fact, in what I consider to be an enormous historical mistake, the consequences of which we're still battling today in terms of the justice system delivering proper punishment, Labour introduced automatic halfway release for essentially all offenders when they were last in. Those aren't included in the 80,000 released early under the emergency schemes I've been talking about earlier. This is just essentially everyone, all offenders, being released early. And yet they still manage to have a sustained crisis in prison capacity. So I don't take any lectures from members opposite on the history of the Labour Party and the criminal justice sector. Under the previous Conservative government, we worked to restore public confidence that serious offenders would face the punishment for their crimes, deserved, and worked hard to ensure, unlike Labour were in, that we were not having to release 80,000 prisoners early on emergency release schemes. We brought in serious reforms. We reduced automatic release from halfway to 2/3 of a sentence for the most serious offenders, a huge step forward for introducing a greater degree of proper punishment into the criminal justice system. Building on that, we introduced whole life tariffs for the premeditated murder of children and increased maximum sentences for the worst child abusers through Tony's Law, and the maximum sentences for killers of emergency service workers through Harper's Law, and for those that killed through driving in memories of victims like Violet Grace and others. I'm proud of all these reforms and make no apologies for them. These measures do create challenges for prison capacity, but as I will go on to discuss, those changes were necessary, and it's COVID more than any other factor that created the challenges we see now. And of course, we did have to tackle the enormous challenges presented by COVID, which have left a long legacy in the criminal justice arena. We prioritised the right to jury trials in a way the rest of the world struggled to. We had one of the shortest suspensions of sitting of trials and did what we could to support jury trials to continue. We increased sitting days, allowing the courts to sit at maximum capacity for 3 years in a row, investing $220 million in essential modernisation work for courts up to 2025 and extending the use of 20 Nightingale courtrooms in 24-25. This kept our justice system moving, despite what Labour now claims. We undoubtedly do still face challenges around the backlog, though. But again, I'm happy to compare records. Labour MPs are now deeply concerned with the backlog. How concerned about Crown Court backlogs were Labour MPs when they were last in government? Well, I can tell members the pre-pandemic backlogs in the Crown Court actually reached higher levels during their time in office than it did under us. And the increase in the remand population of approximately 7,000 above the historical average is a major factor in the prison capacity challenges we are now facing, directly linked to COVID. And now, Madam Deputy Speaker, what has Labour done to decisively make a difference since coming into office? Did they rush to maximise sitting days to get the backlog down? No, they didn't. They've repeatedly dragged their feet. For almost 6 months, they did not take the Lady Chief Justice up on her offer of further sitting days, and even now, there are more days available to them that they haven't funded. With each month that passed, that's more lost court days, more people waiting, more pressure on the system than they have just increased sitting days from the outset. And what's been their biggest celebration in terms of prison building, Madam Deputy Speaker? I can tell members it's the celebration of the opening of a new prison, HMP Miltsyke, planned, paid for and largely built under the previous Conservative government. Despite what they say, we actually created 13,000 prison places in office, including 2 new prisons like HMP 5 Wells and Fosse Way. And I'm not aware that any of Labour's projected plans for prison places are net figures, which the members opposite seem to want to use when looking at our own record. They've announced plans for 14,000 prison places by 2031, supported by £7 billion, but 6,500 of those places were already in the pipeline, announced by the previous Conservative government. 4 of their new prisons were already planned or under construction, so this is less a bold new strategy than it is a tired re-announcement. Even more concerning is the funding gap. The government has allocated £7 billion, but the National Audit Office reports that the Ministry of Justice and HMPPS expect the expansion costs to be closer to £10 billion. That's a £3 billion shortfall and a serious question mark over how the promised places will be delivered. And how are they building on their legacy of releasing over 16,000 prisoners early in just the first 6 months, which is 11,000 more than planned? In the name of, as they call it, sustainability, they're embedding even greater levels of early release into the system, unpicking the positive steps we made in government to turn around their legacy of weaker punishment. They're doing this on the back of a sentencing review by David Gauke, where the premise was set forward that increasing prison populations were unsustainable. I'm clear that that review was an insult to the views of families and their victims, and many of them have told me so directly, and I think it's unfortunate that so many members speak positively about it. Imagine launching what you describe as a landmark review of sentencing and then giving almost no consideration whatsoever within page after page of a report to what victims and their families actually want to see from sentencing. Worse than that, instead of a serious attempt to engage with what victims and their families might want, Mr Gauke chose to deploy the all-too-common patronising talking points that want us to believe that victims and their families simply don't understand sentencing, and if they did, then undoubtedly they would feel much better about it all. This might be of particular interest to the chair of the current Select Committee because Mr Gauke, in particular, cherry-picked quotes from our excellent report from a previous session on public understanding and expectations of sentencing. The member might remember that report very much engaged with what the public would want and ways to determine that more effectively. It takes a particular type of intellectual approach to go through a report full of rich detail and just pick out what suits you and hoping no one would notice. What I did notice, and representatives of victims and their families like Justice for Victims noticed as well. And so this half-baked exercise in considering sentencing has now served as the launch point for the government's sentencing policy. If halfway release wasn't an appalling enough legacy from the last time they were in, they're reducing release at a third of the sentence for most offenders and turning our 2/3 release for the worst offenders back into halfway release. Let us be clear, prisoners will now be rewarded for doing what should be expected of them. Obeying prison rules, engaging in education or working, these are basic behaviours of any law-abiding citizen. They should not qualify offenders for early release and certainly not allow them to serve as little as 1/3 of their sentence. That's not justice. Labour's model rewards serious offenders and does little to protect the public and is a dereliction of duty. All the while, our Crown Court backlogs have increased by more than 10%, standing in excess of 70,000 cases, and our remand population sits at over 17,000 people. Wherever you look, problems Labour promised to fix in opposition are just getting worse. Madam Deputy Speaker, how does the Lord Chancellor now plan to tackle this challenge? Well, the £450 million committed to the courts in the spending review is perhaps a useful, if not fully adequate indication, but how will this money be spent? Unfortunately, this is where the government falls short, that they have no substantial ideas of their own. 14 years apparently wasn't long enough for them to think of their own innovations. So whilst we wait the findings of yet another independent review that the government hopes will solve all their issues, Labour's announced that custodial sentences under 12 months will all but vanish, replaced by community sentences. The consequences of this are staggering. Up to 43,000 offenders, including burglars, shoplifters, knife carriers, will avoid jail altogether. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've met with local businesses who are at their wits' end. They tell me about the rise in shoplifting, about staff who are afraid and customers who no longer feel safe. Removing custodial sentences for repeat offenders does not send a message of reform, it sends a message of impunity. Labour have chosen the easy way out. They're tackling the prison population not with long-term reform or capacity investment, but by quietly reducing sentences and downplaying criminal behaviour. It's short-term thinking and it puts public safety at risk. In fact, just last week, it was reported that they declined to move forward with building a new prison block. They say they're doing everything possible to avoid releasing prisoners early. How does that square with that decision? And what about in areas that cost nothing? You might think they would grab opportunities here. But actually, we've seen them stand in the way of reforms we put forward as amendments to the Victims and Courts Bill this week. Making sure victims are awarded compensation equivalent to their losses, Labour didn't support it. Allowing victims a freedom to speak their minds in victim personal statements, Labour didn't support it. Increasing the time available to collect court fines, Labour didn't support it. Giving victims and families a better chance to appeal unduly lenient sentences, Labour didn't support it. And of all the lofty spending plans will be of little use if this government's ongoing mismanagement of the economy leaves us with even less money to spend on the Ministry of Justice. Across nearly every single major economic metric, Labour have made things worse. Unemployment is up, inflation is up, all the projections of economic growth they inherited from us have been downgraded. Is it any wonder why? The OBR are clear about the damaging impact of their jobs tax, and businesses can see what's on the horizon with the Employment Rights Bill. Costs of borrowing are soaring. The MOJ's expenditure pales in comparison to what we'll be paying on interest in ballooning debt over the course of this Parliament. So I'll finish with 3 short questions. Firstly, given the funding allocated to probation and their increasing reliance on it, given as the member from the Select Committee, the member for Bridgewater, highlighted that the number of probation officers have gone down since they came into power, how do they plan to ensure that money is delivering effective services? Secondly, how do they plan to close the £3 billion gap in the prisons budget? And fourth, given so much of their own thinking is relying on it, when would Brian Levison's report be published? Madam Deputy Speaker, the British people deserve a justice system they can trust, one that protects victims, punishes offenders and keeps our communities safe. This government's approach fails on every single count.
I now call the Minister. Minister Sir Nicholas Dakin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by thanking my honourable friend, the Chair of the Select Committee, for his opening remarks and securing this important debate, along with everybody else who's contributed so thoughtfully, and also echo his words in paying tribute to everybody who works in the criminal justice system. They do an amazing job to maintain public protection, and that is so important. And I support the words of the opposition spokesman in highlighting the work that people who've formerly been in the armed forces play within our criminal justice system. There's much for us to agree on. And one of the things that we know is that Labour has always been tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I just give 3 facts to evidence that. In 13 years of Labour government, we added 27,830 prison places. In 14 years of Conservative government, they added 500 net government prison places. And so far already under this government, we've added around 2,500 prison places. The figures speak for themselves, Madam Deputy Speaker. We want a criminal justice system that works for everyone. That's what the Honourable Member for Bournemouth East said, and I think everybody in this House would agree with that. Last summer, our prisons were operating at over 99% capacity, just days after taking office. We had no choice but to take emergency measures to avoid running out of space altogether. Had we not acted, the result would have been catastrophic. Our courts would have ground to a halt, the police would have been forced to halt arrests. In short, Madam Deputy Speaker, we would have faced a total breakdown of law and order. We were left in this powerless position because the previous government, despite all their promises and fine words, delivered only those 500 additional prison places in 14 years, whilst at the same time sentence lengths rose exponentially. As a result, the prison population is now rising by 3,000 each year. This government takes its duty to protect the public very seriously, and that's why we're taking the robust, bold action needed to bring an end to this cycle of crisis, ensuring that the British public are never again put at the risk by the failure to have enough prison places. We're committed to bearing down on the outstanding caseload in the courts that a number of members have alluded to and delivering swifter justice for victims. But we acknowledge that the challenge facing the Crown Court is significant. As part of the spending review settlement, we agreed with the Treasury that we will fund record investment for the court system by 28-29, keeping sitting days at record highs over this period, 110,000 sitting days in the Crown Court just this year. But we recognise that this is not enough, given the scale of the challenge we inherited. Even with the record levels of Crown Court funding and our plans for record numbers of future sitting days, without substantial reform of our criminal courts, the backlog will continue to grow. That's why, Madam Deputy Speaker, Lord Chancellor has commissioned an independent review of the criminal courts, led by Sir Brian Leveson, one of our most distinguished judges, to consider the options for longer-term reform, as well as reviewing the efficiency and timeliness of court processes through charge to case completion. And I would hope that that report would report shortly, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will also fund capacities to speed up the processing of asylum appeals, supporting the government's priority to reduce illegal and irregular migration. The legal aid is a vital part of the justice system, as we've heard from colleagues across the House. It underpins our plans to build a justice system that works fairly for all parties. In December, we announced that criminal legal aid solicitors will receive up to £92 million more a year to help address the ongoing challenges in the criminal justice system and get justice for victims. Following that, in January, we began consulting over a £20 million uplift to civil legal aid fees for lawyers working in the immigration, asylum and housing and debt sectors. And I also pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool Riverside, who spoke about the importance of forensic science and addressing miscarriages of justice, as well as issues around prison maintenance in our prisons. We are failing victims if courts can't deliver swift justice. Prisons run out of places entirely and crime goes without punishment. My honourable friend, the member for Colchester, spoke about this in her contribution. This will have damaging consequences for the criminal justice system if that's happened, and that's why we're taking the steps to rebuild a justice system that works and victims can have confidence in. We are looking at imposing tougher exclusion zones that limit the movement of offenders instead of limiting the movement of victims, and continuing the provision of free sentencing remarks to victims of rape and serious sexual offences. These reforms will include continuing to expand our application of electronic monitoring to perpetrators of violence against women and girls, and the use of specialist domestic abuse courts with trained staff to support victims and more coordinated management of perpetrators. We will continue to fund services supporting victims and witnesses. And the Liberal Democrat spokesman made some eloquent contributions around that issue, which I heard very clearly, so I thank him for that. We're creating a new domestic abuse flag at sentencing so that domestic abusers are known to prison and probation services and their victims are better protected. Since taking office, we have opened 2,400 prison places between 24 and 25 and 29-30. The government is providing £7 billion more to deliver the commitment to build 14,000 new prison places by 2031. This will be the largest expansion since the Victorian era. I give way.
To the Minister for giving way. I did ask in my contribution whether the Minister could outline how much of the extra money his department has been allocated will go in higher wage rises, higher national insurance charges and inflation. I'm just giving him the chance to respond before he concludes.
As he will understand, the budget is being applied and worked through in an appropriate way, but those are the figures I've just given him are the figures that we are going to deliver on, so he can be confident about that. Whilst this investment is necessary alone, it's not sufficient. So to address these challenges and ensure our prisons create better citizens, not better criminals, the Lord Chancellor commissioned the independent sentencing review chaired by the Right Honourable David Gauke. As the Lord Chancellor announced in May following David Gauke's findings, we will be introducing an earned progression model based on a three-part sentence. Under this model, offenders' release points will be determined by their behaviour. If they follow prison rules, they will earn earlier release. If they do not, they will be locked up for longer. However, this will not be true for all offenders. For those currently serving extended determinate sentences with an automatic release point of 67%, the earliest release that they can... it's different for people who have earlier releases. We'll leave that as it is. In the second part of the progression model, offenders will enter a period of intensive supervision. This will see more offenders tagged and under close supervision from probation. This supervision will be tailored according to each offender's risk and crime type and bolstered beyond the current system with a set of new restrictive measures and a major ramp up in tagging and probation investment. And in the third part, offenders will be monitored in the community by probation and can be returned to prison if they breach their conditions. Alongside the progression model, we are also taking forward the recommendations to introduce a presumption to suspend short sentences. We will be investing in this model and intensive supervision through significantly increasing our probation funding through the spending review settlement. And I welcome the comments from the member for Amber Valley and also the highlighting of third sector organisations that contribute in this space from the members for Bournemouth East and Rugby. Our additional investment will increase up to £700 million by 28-29, allowing us to substantially increase the number of offenders on tags and ensure investment in services that address the drivers of offending.
May I ask the Minister very kindly, when Leveson reports, is there going to be capacity for more funding for the recommendations which Leveson makes?
We await the Leveson report, and when the Leveson report comes, obviously the Lord Chancellor will come to the House to update the House on those issues, and those sort of things will be rightly dealt with then. On efficiencies, obviously the spending review has given a settlement to the department, which the department will ensure is good value for money by applying all the appropriate methods to that. So rest assured of that, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government inherited a system creaking under pressure, having suffered chronic underfunding for 14 years. The Justice Committee is right to point out that by 2016-17, the day-to-day budget of the department had fallen by a third in real terms. That's why we're delivering an ambitious, once-in-a-generation reform of the justice system that this country needs, with public safety at its core.
With the leave of the House, I call Andy Slaughter to wind up briefly.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't need to add any matters to my speech because the inevitable gaps in that have been filled eloquently by the speakers since then. So can I just take 2 minutes to thank those who contributed to this debate. The member for Bridgewater, Colchester, Amber Valley, Wells and Mendip Hills, Solihull, Western Shirley and Eastbourne, albeit wearing his other hat as the Lib Dem spokesperson, all members of the Justice Committee, and I thank them for being here. Indeed, could I thank all the members of the Justice Committee, with the exception of the member for Wells and Mendip Hills, who resumed a distinguished parliamentary career after a short gap. They're all new members and they all give a lot of time to this in addition to everything else which they as new members have to do. Could I thank the other members who've spoken, my friend from Bournemouth East for his forensic dissection of the previous government's failings in this area, and particularly my friend for Liverpool Riverside, who covered ground that I didn't have time to cover in terms of the CCRC and miscarriages of justice. I'd like to thank her for what she does, chairing that APPG, and also thank my friend for Derby North, what she does with the Access to Justice and other APPGs in this field. Can I even, in conclusion, thank the front benches for their contributions. My friend for Eastbourne is always very critical but very constructive in what he says. Perhaps the member for Bexhill and Battle would like to take that approach. Well, no, I didn't think so. I enjoyed very much our time together on the Justice Committee. I also enjoy in these debates him taking every bad point. But I think he should have been kinder towards the distinguished former Lord Chancellor David Cork, who I think did a very good report. And I say to the Minister, who's a very good friend of mine, thank him for his contributions. We know what a difficult job he has, but that won't stop us being on his back all the time to make sure that the many problems that have been identified today are resolved. Thank you very much.
Order, order. The question necessary to dispose of the motion stands over until 7 o'clock, under Standing Order number 54. That ends that estimates debate. If the ministers want to quickly stop over, and if colleagues are exiting, to exit very quickly, very quietly. We now come to the motion on the estimate for the Ministry of Defence. I call the Minister to move the motion formally. Move. The question is, as on the order paper, the debate will be opened by the Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I thank you, Mr Speaker, and the Backbench Business Committee for selecting the defence debate for debate today, if I may say so, particularly appropriate in Armed Forces Week. I also like to pay tribute to the Minister and my honourable friend on the front bench for being here today to listen to this speech, and hopefully the Minister for answering a few questions. I'd like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Slough, who is Chairman of the Defence Select Committee, who would have actually joined me as a joint application for this debate, but his committee have been away from Parliament on a visit. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the defence budget is one of the most important estimates that the House can debate and scrutinise. With war raging in Ukraine, the ongoing Israeli-Gaza conflict, and now what is happening in Iran, our world feels increasingly unstable. The Prime Minister has recently returned from the G7 and is now at the NATO summit, ensuring that our interests align with our European, AUKUS and American allies, which is critical. As General Walker, Chief of the General Staff, said last July, we must be ready for war within 3 years. And the rest of my speech, I think, is probably devoted to that theme. So first, I'd like to discuss the figures of the defence budget. I think most people in this House are pleased to see that defence spending is now considered a priority. The Strategic Defence Review announced early in June was welcomed and confirmed that defence spending will be going up from 2% of GDP to 2.5% by April 27, with an extra 0.1% going towards intelligence and security services contributions. There was a further commitment to increase defence spending to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament, but it is noted that no date has been set for this yet. The new announcement by the Prime Minister at the NATO summit suggests the government will expect to spend 5% of GDP on national security and defence by the end of the next Parliament or by 2035, which includes 3% core defence spending and 1.5% on resilience and security spending. I'd like to ask members to bear with me while I just go through these somewhat complicated figures of what this will involve. In 2024, 1% of GDP is around 28 billion, according to the House of Commons Library. But hopefully our GDP will increase as the years go by. Colleagues should note critically that a percentage increase in the budget is not the same as an increase in percentage of GDP, hence the much higher figures that I'm about to go into. The current Ministry of Defence budget, according to the Treasury Red Book for 25-6, is 62.2 billion. That is around 2.2% of GDP. For the government to reach the needed 2.5% of GDP by 27, and set aside the fact that the MOD budget does not quite align with the NATO compliance spending, the defence budget must increase to around 70 billion in 27-8. And with the extra 1.1% that I mentioned earlier, that is a total of 72.8 billion. Therefore, another 9 to 11 billion pounds needs to be found in the next 2 years. So moving further into the next Parliament, if we're to reach the 3% of GDP figure in the next Parliament, the defence budget will need to equate to around 84 billion in current prices today. And after the announcement today of the 3.5% equating figures is 98 billion, and core defence and resilience of 1.5% is 42 billion, therefore the total spending by 2035 will need to be 140 billion. These calculations are also dependent on the GDP staying the same and not increasing, in which case the budget will, of course, increase as well. Therefore, I'd simply like to ask the Minister today, where is all this money coming from? Because it is a huge amount of money. Now, with the failure to produce the Defence Investment Plan, along with the Strategic Defence Review, the SDR is merely a list of ambitions and aspirations with few receipts and invoices attached. In the ministerial statement, I did ask the Secretary of State if he could confirm when we would be able to scrutinise the figures, but I understand the Defence Investment Plan is still an unfinished piece of work and not due to be published until the autumn. That is a long way off. And as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, the committee are always looking at how effectively money is spent and whether it could be spent more effectively given the taxpayer best value for money and whether indeed it is feasible. However, the committee is not being able to fulfil that statutory role of scrutinising equipment defence spending for at least 12 months. The last Defence Equipment Plan was published in November 22. This sent out a 10-year spending plan for equipment procurement, which was around 305.5 billion, and there was a 16.9 billion shortfall of the money that was then available. So the Permanent Secretary did come to our... Can I just finish this sentence? And of course I'll give way to my honourable friend. I'm pleased that the Permanent Secretary did accept our invitation to come to our committee in April to discuss the equipment plan, but he didn't come with any proposals as to how and when we might be able to scrutinise this defence expenditure to see whether these huge aspirations were affordable in this budget, or the next budget of 3%, or the following one of 3.5%. So I think it's really important that Parliament does actually have a timetable when we will be able to do that scrutiny. Happy to give way to my honourable friend for spell.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving way. He mentions the equipment plan. Does he share the Defence Select Committee's frustration that I think he mentioned that the last time anyone was able to scrutinise that was in 2022? And is he aware that when Lord Robertson came to the Defence Committee to discuss the Strategic Defence Review last week, he was surprised that the Defence Committee was being denied access to the equipment programme, as indeed the Public Accounts Committee is, so that the government simply can't be held to account on what they're spending the money on?
Well, my honourable friend has made the case very eloquently. I have also made it. The Minister will have heard it. Hopefully she might have something to positively say about this in her summing up. Of course.
For allowing me to intervene. To what extent does he believe that the situation is even worse than he has outlined? Because we know that inflationary pressures on defence bear far more heavily than on practically, with the possible exception of healthcare, any other part of public spending. And yet I see no evidence in the Defence Review or anywhere else over the past 12 months of that being properly accounted for by ministers or those who are advising them.
Well, my honourable friend must have read my mind, because when I come on to submarines, I will mention this very factor of inflation in defence costs. So the MOD is being reorganised into 4 sections. There will be a permanent secretary in charge of the department. The chief of the defence organisation will be in charge of all personnel matters. A new National Armaments Director will be in charge of all matters to do with procurement, digital and research, and including all the matters to do with what is now in the Defence Infrastructure Organisation. And, of course, finally, the Defence Nuclear Organisation. So those are the 4 parts of it. But this particular debate focuses on the National Armaments Director, and his appointment has been ongoing since it was announced on the 17th of December 24 last year. And I'm hopeful that the department might soon be in a position to announce who they have selected to do the job. And I have to say the job is a very prestigious, a very large one, and it has a very large salary attached to it of £400,000. So the National Armaments Director will be responsible, as I said, for all defence procurement, all defence infrastructure organisation, including defence housing, digital and research. And this represents a huge part of the defence budget. He will have significantly more control over the acquisition process than hitherto. And I hope some of the announcements that have been made by the government will come to fruition, including being able to go from award to contract in a 2-year maximum. And the department is hoping to do that by involving industry at a much earlier stage in the process, so to help solve problems
And rather than over-specifying the requirements, this will actually streamline it and simplify the contracts. This should also allow our defence sector to export more equipment to the international market, which will in turn support even more jobs in the sector. One contract that demonstrates the weakness in our procurement strategy was the Ajax Armoured Fighting Vehicle, a programme contracted to General Dynamics. And this was both subject to many Defence Select Committee, Public Accounts Committee, many UQs in this House. It was originally contracted in 2011 for delivery in 2017 and then deferred to 2021. And the trials were halted, as we all know, due to safety concerns, and the contract renegotiated for 2024. Perhaps the Minister could tell us when all 180 vehicles will be in operation. In addition to General Dynamics being awarded that contract, they were also awarded the infamous Moorfields Battlefield Radio System contract. And this has cost so far £828 million. So can the Minister confirm it is currently in the Evolve to Transition Partnership and when its in-service date is likely to occur? It was intended to replace the existing Bowman communication system by 2026, but this will now have to be extended with modifications to at least 2031 and possibly 2035. And I think this may lead to a credibility gap in our defence system. And I think the whole House would appreciate an update on where we are with our tri-service battlefield communications system and how this could be accelerated. Another contract that should receive more scrutiny is the E7 wedge tail early warning and control early warning and control aircraft. Whilst the SDR says we will procure further units and share costs with our NATO allies, the Pentagon has labelled the E-17 expensive, gold-plated and not survivable in the modern battlefield. Again, we would be grateful to the Minister for providing further details on this contract. The government, as I said in my answer to the Minister of Procurement's statement today, and I welcome, has committed to buying more F-35 aircraft, 12 F-35As and 15 F-35Bs. And that is welcome. This capability of the A's will be an alternative to our seaborne nuclear capability. Another huge commitment as part of the SDR is commitment to invest in up to 12 new SSN AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines. The submarines are due to be in operation in the 2030s and 40s, with a submarine being built every 18 months. But there are huge challenges ahead, due to this being a new class of submarines and concerns with the lack of capacity at Barrow-in-Furness. However, no cost per submarine has ever been disclosed, and this programme is likely to take more than 10 years, and we really need to see some of the detail. Is this deal underpinned by the government's eventual commitment to increase expenditure to 3% in the next Parliament? So we can see whether it's feasible, and we can also see, and I'll be grateful if the Minister would confirm this, talking about long in-service dates, as I was with the F-35s earlier on, and the Minister agreed with this. We need to see actually the early work in feasibility in contracts beginning as soon as possible to meet this long tail end to buying and building and commissioning these submarines. This strategically important contract, when costs announced, will need leadership from the National Armaments Director to ensure it remains on track budget, like so many others before it. The Public Accounts Committee have asked for an update by the end of June 26, which will demonstrate how well defence procurement has improved under the first year of the National Armaments Director Group. The renewed focus on nuclear is important when looking at the ever-increasing nuclear enterprise budget. In 2024, the budget was £10.9 billion, which is around 18% of the whole budget. The 10-year DNE's costs have increased by £10 billion, from £117.8 billion to £128 billion. And it's not clear whether the extra £15 billion announced in the SDR committed to the warhead is included in this figure. However, the budget is rising due to various factors, technical factors, but inflation and the speed of manufacturing which we now need to build these submarines at to meet the timetable that is absolutely necessary for our defence. The budget is also one of the few that is left unscrutinised due to the sensitive nature of these contracts. But as chairman of the PAC, I am constitutionally obliged to see the detail. Ongoing, this needs to be resolved, and I'm grateful for the commitment of the Secretary of State in working towards a solution. Sensitive scrutiny has never been more important due to the context of these figures that I announced earlier. Defence personnel is another focus in the defence budget. The national insurance rise meant that the budget had to increase by £14.3 billion to pay for the Treasury's national insurance employer tax rise. The number of people leaving the armed forces is far too high. Last year, for every 100 personnel we were recruiting in the army, we lost 130. This is completely unsustainable, especially as the SDR commits to increasing our forces to 76,000. The PAC have recently held a session on cadet and reserve forces, which again the SDR clarifies that the government wants to increase the number of cadets by 30% and critically reservists by 20%. And again, I would be grateful if the government could confirm how much this will cost. We do need to make joining the armed forces a much more attractive option than it currently is. Some of the defence housing I've seen, frankly, a prisoner would get better and safer conditions. Much of it has mould, rust, leaks, and this must change if we want to improve the retention and recruitment of our armed forces in giving them a better package of remuneration and conditions of service. So I welcome the £1.5 billion to improve defence housing as part of the SDR and the £6.1 billion that has been spent to repurchase 35,000 homes following the landmark deal with Annington Homes. This will allow the MOD to undertake major improvement schemes. Another issue with recruitment is the length of time it takes to enrol service personnel into training. We used to have an armed forces recruitment centre on every high street in the country. People could walk in off the street, sign up, wear a new uniform in the next 2 weeks. But there are now stories of recruitment taking well over 6 months, which is simply not good enough. We need to be looking further afield to ensure the military has the right skills for the future. Cyber warfare is becoming an increasing and real threat. And I believe the MOD could do more to recruit those with AI and digital skills that wouldn't necessarily meet the medical and fitness requirements needed for entry for a normal military personnel. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think, yes, very briefly.
Very generous indeed. Would you comment on the government's enthusiasm or otherwise for the Haythornthwaite review of careers in the armed forces, which was carried out under the last government and was put in train by the last government, but we hear tell perhaps there's been some backsliding since, which is a pity, since Rick Haythornthwaite's review was magisterial and had already shown signs through zigzag careers and spectrum of service of being appealing to servicemen and servicewomen and holding them in, both in the regulars and reserves. And it would be a pity if we didn't have that process continue on the basis of not made here-itis.
To my honourable friend for raising that issue, I can't tell what's in the government's mind. Maybe the Minister will be able to tell us this afternoon. But given the SDR makes it perfectly clear that they want to increase the numbers of our armed forces considerably, we've got to consider every aspect of recruiting and retaining more of those, and particularly when they've got skills, making sure they don't just leave the army or the armed forces as soon as they've got those skills. So I think this is a really important issue that my honourable friend has raised. In conclusion, there is no greater duty on a government than defending the nation. Yet for all members of this House and for the general public, we need to have confidence that our armed forces are properly equipped to do the job. This does not mean that we complacently give in to every demand, but it is the role of PAC members to carefully scrutinise the defence budget. Wasting spending and shortfalls are stopping our armed forces from keeping us safe in the most efficient and effective ways. Therefore, it is imperative that the MOD release more information on their finances in a timely manner so that we can thoroughly scrutinise them and thus ensure Parliament that our armed forces are able to do their job in the most effective way with world-beating equipment.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's welcome that today's debate focuses on the remit of the National Armaments Director and comes, as the other member has said, as the Prime Minister attends the NATO summit, where we're likely to see a greater focus and action on the need to increase defence spending. However, as this government has said before, it's not all about numbers in a spreadsheet or a press release. and the National Armaments Director will allow the UK to focus on how defence money is being spent to increase the lethality of our armed forces and ensure the deterrent effect of the combined UK armed forces is sufficient to prevent a war no one in this chamber wants to see. That position shows our government is delivering the change we promised, greater coherence and strategic focus in our procurement and industrial planning, cracking down on waste and boosting Britain's defence industry. Madam Deputy Speaker, what I want to see, as I'm sure others in this House want to see, is that we move as quickly as possible, because only by doing that can we make sure our adversaries know that we are committed to our own defence. And there are three specific issues I want to raise today and ask the Minister to provide clarification and assure me that some of these will be among the first priorities for the Armaments Director and indeed for the Ministry of Defence. First, looking at a globe rather than a flat map shows the strategic reality the UK faces, as well as the importance of Scotland's position as well. From the high north, Russian ships and submarines can threaten NATO, merchant shipping and, crucially, underwater cables in the Atlantic. The Strategic Defence Review highlighted the need to, and I quote, improve NATO's deterrence in Northern Europe and the High North, and recently NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte emphasised, and I quote, a larger role for NATO in the High North. This very much makes the UK, and Scotland in particular, a frontline nation in combating Russian aggression. To do that, the SDR spoke of the need for an, and I quote, always-on supply line for shipbuilding, with the Royal Navy continuing to move towards a, and I quote, a more powerful but cheaper and simpler fleet. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Type 31 frigates being built by Babcock at the Rosyth Dockyard in my constituency would seem to fit the bill for that kind of move, along with providing the requirement for an always-on supply of shipbuilding. The first Type 31 HMS Venturer was recently floated off, and other ships of the initial 5 ordered by the Royal Navy are progressing well. And can I take this opportunity to once again thank the workforce at Rosyth for the incredible contribution that they make to our nation's defence in the construction of Type 31, as well as the other incredible work they do for us as well and our American allies. But can the Minister confirm that the Armaments Director will urgently consider the need for more Type 31 frigates to reflect the flexibility of this platform, as well as the lower cost and faster production that the incredible workforce at Rosyth have been able to deliver? Second, Madam Deputy Speaker, there have been many discussions in this place, particularly from my honourable friend, the member for Durham North, regarding the need to improve the UK's air defence capability. And this has also been a key theme of the ongoing Sky News podcast, The War Game, created by a range of defence experts and advisors, and certainly something I've been listening to over the last couple of weeks. I'll think I'm a few episodes behind at the moment. Nonetheless, improving that capability will require a number of solutions in collaboration with allies, with NATO and others, but part of that has been suggested that the future air dominance system FADS and Britain's next type generation Type 83 programme would be part of countering the emerging threat from hypersonic missiles. With the increased prominence of this type of threat visible in both Ukraine and recent conflicts in the Middle East, can the Minister please provide an update on those programmes and how the Armaments Director is likely to prioritise this important work? Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's vital as part of our increase in defence spending that we make defence an engine for growth, boosting prosperity, jobs and growth in every corner of the UK. That we are strengthening the UK's industrial base to better deter our adversaries and make the UK secure at home and strong abroad. That means engaging all parts of society and business, including the growing network of high-tech SMEs and skilled manufacturers in my own constituency and in Fife and across Scotland and the rest of the UK. Madam Deputy Speaker, this week we heard from the Secretary of State for Business and Trade of the exciting prospect of a Defence Growth Fund, which could begin to bring together different parts to deliver on combined objectives of economic investment and improving defence. In my own area, this could include opportunities for Fife Council, Fife College, both of whom I believe could play a much larger role in delivering on defence and providing the skills and training our young people need and deserve. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a topic I've raised numerous times in this place already, and where we've seen the total failure of the SNP Scottish Government in devolved areas such as skills and infrastructure spending. We have the farcical position of senior people in the SNP saying it's party policy that public money shouldn't be spent on military equipment. We've had the even more ridiculous position where the SNP responded to a request for medical aid from the Ukrainian government by dictating it could not be used on military casualties. A preposterous position and one utterly detached from reality that puts Scotland's security at risk, as well as reducing opportunities for young people in my own constituency. Can I ask the Minister to provide any updates on her discussions with the Department for Business and Trade on the Defence Growth Fund and how that will benefit people in Scotland, as the SNP have failed to do so far? Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has responded brilliantly to the global threats the UK faces, building alliances and partnerships across the world, and with the creation of the National Armaments Director and the reorganisation we've heard about already today and in previous statements from the front bench. I just hope that we can accelerate as fast as we can along that path to make sure we meet those threats as the British public expect us to do. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr Neil Shastri-Hurst.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As we deliberate today's debate, this House will quite properly consider the scale and seriousness of the threats we face. From conventional deterrence in Europe to strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific, the case for strengthening our armed forces is not just compelling, it is essential. But we must also be honest about how we fund that renewal and what we are willing to sacrifice in the process of doing so. Let me be clear, the case for increased defence spending is self-evident. I, along with many others, have long argued that we must invest more in our sovereign capability, in critical munitions, in advanced deterrence and in national resilience. This includes expanding both the remit and the resourcing of the National Armaments Director, a role whose strategic significance has grown substantially in today's volatile security environment. The National Armaments Director is not merely a procurement official. They are the principal architect of our defence industrial strategy, responsible for ensuring that our armed forces are equipped not just adequately but decisively. Their portfolio spans capability planning, acquisition reform, exportability and the stewardship of our defence supply base, from the factory floor to the front line. In an age of contested logistics, technological disruption and rapid rearmament by authoritarian regimes, the role is fundamental to preserving both operational readiness and the sovereign capability. Delivering a credible deterrent in today's world means accelerating procurement cycles, building on modularity and adaptability, strengthening domestic supply chains, and driving long-term collaboration between government, industry and academia. It means ensuring that we can surge production in a crisis, replenish stockpiles at speed, and invest in the innovation that gives us the strategic edge. Now, this cannot be done in isolation or as an afterthought. It must be led, coordinated and embedded across defence planning, not in spite of fiscal pressures, but because of them. If we are serious about resilience, Madam Deputy Speaker, serious about readiness, and serious about regeneration, then we must empower the National Armaments Director with the authority, capacity and resources to act not simply as a technical overseer, but as a strategic enabler at the heart of defence policy. Only then can we translate increased spending into a real-world capability and ensure that British power is not only credible on paper, but deliverable in practice. But I must be equally clear that this investment must not come at the expense of our international development commitments. To fund defence by slashing foreign aid is a false economy. Worse, it risks undermining the very strategic posture that we seek to build. Aid is not an indulgence, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is not a soft option, and it's certainly not a luxury for easier times. It's an instrument of our national strategy, a projection of British values, a tool for soft power, and a forward-deployed asset in the defence of the realm. When Britain pulls back from the world, our adversaries do not hesitate to step in. China in particular has understood this dynamic. It doesn't wait for crises to send in troops, it sends in investment, infrastructure and influence, often to the very regions from which we have retreated. So when we reduce aid, we do not save, but we cede ground. We create vacuums that others are all too willing to fill. And let's be frank, foreign aid and defence are not in conflict, they are complementary. One builds resilience, prevents crises and supports our allies. The other protects us from as those crises unfold. A truly strategic posture requires both, because real security doesn't start when the first shot is fired. It starts in the classrooms of conflict zones, in the clinics of fragile states, and in the partnerships we forge before troubles take root. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we choose to retreat from the world, we shall find that the world does not retreat from us.
Catherine Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My husband was an Army reservist and served in Afghanistan, and he hasn't told me a great deal about what his job entailed, but he has told me about taking helicopter flights, hugging close to the mountains where the burnt-out remnants of Soviet tanks stand ghostly guard, and his interactions with the Afghan people, both the Afghan army and civilians who worked with us, and buying bread from locals and visiting children treated in the hospital on the ISAF army base. And it can be a throwaway phrase used by politicians to say our armed forces are the best in the world. But it's one that I stand by, and I know that so many of the families of our armed forces, both in Derby and across the country, stand by it too. And as we celebrate Armed Forces Week in Derby, I will be thinking of them. But it is absolutely essential that our armed forces have the kit and the arms and the technology that they need. And in my view, those who serve our national security by working in the defence industry and their families should also have their contribution celebrated too.
Hear, hear.
We are in a new era of threat, which demands a new era for UK defence. So it is absolutely right that this government has announced the largest sustained increase to defence spending since the end of the Cold War and has already boosted defence spending by £5 billion this year. Yeah. And as the government increases defence spending, it is making defence an engine for growth, boosting prosperity, jobs and growth in every corner of the UK. Now, over the last few weeks, Derby has been mentioned many times in this chamber. It's one city of many that is benefiting from the government's commitment to defence and security in creating the skilled, secure jobs that we have, that we see in our city and across Derbyshire and the East Midlands too. And the UK-based firms will be prioritised for government investment under the new defence industrial strategy to drive economic growth and boost British jobs and strengthen national security. But under the last government, small businesses often felt locked out of defence, and just 4% of government defence spend went to small and medium enterprises. And I believe this government is right in prioritising government investment for UK-based firms under the new industrial defence strategy, so that we can drive growth and jobs and have specific support to open the door to small businesses. And Derby has a large part to play because we make things in Derby. Rolls-Royce in Derby was known for having created the Merlin engine, first produced in 1936 and used in Lancaster bombers and Spitfires and Hurricanes. But we also have Rolls-Royce submarines in Derby, who build the nuclear reactors that power our at-sea deterrent. And UK submarines are the most awesome and lethal machines in the world's history. And I believe in the power of politics and the power of negotiation to preserve peace, a peace we all desperately want to see. But we have to acknowledge that our submarines, the sheer size and power of them, has spoken more loudly than words for over 60 years. And they help underwrite our security. Because we can't wish away the threats that exist, that are growing, and we have to deter them. And time again, our Prime Minister has confirmed that security and defence is the first duty of the government. And that priority can be seen in the investment that is being made. And from submarines to drones, Derby has a major role to play in supporting the government to make and keep Britain safe, secure at home, and strong abroad.
I call John Cooper.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. I have been banging along like a howitzer, well, maybe like a small bore cannon, about the need to mobilise British industry as we ramp up for possible conflict in an increasingly hostile world I welcome the news that the new National Armaments Director is being resourced to oversee the alliance of our military brains and brawn with the sinews of British defence industry. Civilians talk tactics, veterans talk logistics, for old warriors know that a modern army marches not so much on its stomach, as in the days of Wellington and Napoleon, as on a very long supply chain, anchored mainly in small and medium-sized enterprises. This extends, to use the military's favourite phrase, to all domains. We have had recent sharp lessons on the reality of modern warfare, from the muddy hell of trenches in occupied Ukraine to the arid highlands of Iran. We have seen high-tech systems, drones, cyber, space and stealth undergo a baptism of fire. But we've also seen weapons that would have been familiar to my infantryman grandfather on the shores of Gallipoli in 1915 ply their old trade to deadly effect. Artillery remains the queen of the battlefield. So while our sailors, soldiers and aircrew are the tip of the spear, the essential shaft is our factories and shipyards, and every corner of the country can play its full part. I say every part, Madam Deputy Speaker, but there is bad news from Scotland under the SNP yoke. There, the Nationalists and their Green Party fellow travellers have engendered a hostile environment for defence firms. We have seen young apprentices denied entrance to the Holyrood Parliament by an elected representative tipped now to lead the Greens. In recent days, we have seen former First Minister Humza Yousaf, still an MSP, blundering around on the world stage, shroud-waving about war crimes at Prestwick by allowing US military aircraft to refuel and bemoaning the prescription of the saboteurs of Palestine action. There is a presumption, as we heard for the Honourable Member for Dunfermline and Dollar, that the Scottish Government will not channel funding towards ordnance, a battlefield prerequisite. That led this government to step in to say they will help fund a new Rolls-Royce Centre of Welding Excellence on the Clyde, key to submarine and warship building. The stakes, Madam Deputy Speaker, could not be higher. Scotland is already a defence powerhouse. Umbrella body ADS estimates 16,250 people in Scotland work in the sector, producing Royal Navy warships, cutting-edge radars, optronic masts, don't dare call them mere periscopes, for submarines, smart missiles such as Storm Shadow. Even my own rural constituency of Dumfries and Galloway produces the helmets vital to the sensor suite of F-35 Lightning fighter bombers, of which we are purchasing 12 more nuclear-capable Alpha variants. Figures from 2023 show the MOD spending £370 per person living in Scotland. It is, or ought to be, Britain's arsenal. And as such, Scotland should be top of the in-tray for the National Armaments Director. Yet, firms wanting to set up the new ordnance factories recommended in the Strategic Defence Review, or seeking to expand to fulfil new MOD orders, cannot count on financial support via the Scottish Government. Whose side is Scotland's First Minister on, Madam Deputy Speaker? And can the Minister here tell the House what powers the new Armaments Director will have to eliminate the Scottish Government's reckless fifth columnist policies on defence?
I call Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I want to start by thanking everyone in our armed forces who serves, who has served, and who has fallen. Our country is safer and better because of their service. In assessing the financial necessity of meeting our defence needs, it's important, first of all, to take a look at the state of our world. That involves a look at not only our real adversaries, but our potential adversaries, and moreover, our allies and the most powerful country in the world, the United States. I want to do this because I think too often in our country and indeed across the world, there is an assumption that somehow the foreign policy of the current president will be a blip. And I don't believe that to be so. I want to spend a little time talking about this because I think it's important for my constituents and also for this House to reflect on that reality as this country and this government sets its path towards a long-term investment in the defence capabilities that we so desperately need. After being dismissed as a phenomenon of an earlier century, great power competition returned. So says the 2017 National Security Strategy of the United States released by President Trump. The most pressing strategic challenge facing our vision is from powers that layer authoritarian governance with a revisionist foreign policy. So says the 2022 National Security Strategy released by President Biden. In 2017, the era of cooperation that had defined multiple US presidencies in the post-Cold War era was declared dead by President Trump. In 2022, the era of competition that had defined the Trump era was given new life by President Biden. Two contrasting presidencies, two sides of the same coin. As Russia illegally invaded Ukraine, a sovereign democratic country, as China makes clear its designs on Taiwan, a sovereign democratic country, those two autocracies have deepened their ties and they've collaborated more closely with other UK and US rivals. It's clear that the consensus that has been emerging in the Beltway was accurate. The main priority of American foreign policy as great power competition is clear. Aspiration of the outcome that the US stays ahead of the pack is clear. Now, we in this House will debate the motivations and the character of President Trump's behaviour. It will be open to interpretation. But in some important ways, his worldview has a more settled nature. With him and Biden as president and the United States as a great power, pursuing US interests in a world where competition is the enduring and defining feature, our American ally has for some time now been telling a story about how it sees itself and the world. And we would be foolish to see the current presidency as a blip. It's a continuation of a tradition. Of course, there are differences between the two presidencies. They differ in their approach to diplomacy and how nationalistically it should be pursued. They differ in their assessment of American interests and how aggressively they should be pursued. They differ in their adherence to American values and how devotedly they should be upheld. In sum, whether to collaborate with countries with whom it has always collaborated, such as the United Kingdom, either as an end in itself, to reinforce and sustain an American-led order of democracies, or as a means to an important end, to pursue an economic strength and a national security that traditional democratic allies would seek too. But the presidencies and presidents do not differ in their assessments of the international system and the need for competition. And this is a critical point that will define UK defence decisions this year and in subsequent years. I obviously have a preference for a particular style of behaviour. I would much prefer President Biden's form of foreign policy. But the outcomes that are being pursued are clear. So this begs the question, whoever succeeds President Trump, will they deviate from or continue his foreign policy? And I would argue that it will be a continuation. So if the priority of the US, our closest ally, will be to stay ahead of those autocracies in the long term, and we have stronger ties and shared values with the United States as it becomes more competitive with those rivals, it is in our interest to do all that we can to counter the rise of those rivals, to mitigate against their worst behaviours, to minimise their risk to our security, and to militate against their threats to our values with the United States wherever possible, and other democracies who make the same assessment of our threat. And that is why it's so important that we are investing in our defence capabilities. We are making the largest sustained increase to defence spending. We have boosted defence spending by £5 billion this year. We are committed to achieving 4.1% of spending of our GDP by 2027 and 5% by 2035. And I commend that strongly, given the international circumstances that we face. And that's so important to do, and it's so important in this House to educate our constituencies about why it's so important to do. In this House, it's important we bring the right scrutiny to our defence decisions. No, I won't. Please sit down. It's important that we bring the right scrutiny to our decisions and our defence strategy. And it is important too that across this House we conduct ourselves in appropriate fashion. And so in advancing our defence and our security with the decisions that are pursuant to that, we as this House should be united. In the other ways in which our society has been disunited, we need as a House to be coming together and finding solutions in a party way. This year, we have recently marked the 80th anniversary of VE Day. 80 years have passed, but memory is not enough. Imagine a world without victory in Europe. A world where tyranny had triumphed, where darkness had endured. Now look at the world today. It's a world where autocracies dominate, divide and deceive, where freedom is retreating. We owe those who fought, those who fell, more than remembrance. We owe those who carried that loss nothing less than vigilance. And that means vigilance against those autocracies and vigilance against the risk of misjudgment, miscalculation and misadventure. And that's why all of us in this House have an important role to play in making sure that the defence decisions of this government will be important. It means being a strong democracy, cohering our society, strengthening institutions of our state, growing economically, securing our clean homegrown energy, investing in the new technologies and equipping our military with the tools and technologies that they need. It means being a true ally, telling our allies around the world when things aren't working, giving our allies reason to listen by growing in strength and purpose, and speaking with the affection and wisdom of an old country that has known what it is to rise, to navigate uncertainty, to be attacked at home, to know the blessings of freedom being imperilled, to decline from great power, but still nonetheless to work with allies and partners to secure freedom in our world against very difficult circumstances.
Lincoln Job.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I rose to give my maiden speech just under a year ago, I took the opportunity to express my frustration that the government had announced a spending review which was going to essentially buy the political cover to get to 2.5% of GDP. And the frustration that I expressed at the time was that the dogs in the streets knew that we needed 2.5%, and we essentially wasted the best part of a year.
Very good.
And I think that the evidence for that is clear to us all, because when Lord Robertson came and General Barrons came in front of the Defence Select Committee when they kicked off the Strategic Defence Review, I asked them, I said, when Lord Robertson had done his prior defence review, he had, it had been very clearly threat-based and foreign policy-led, whereas this one seemed to be saying 2.5% is the answer. Now what is the question? And so it proved, because partway through the Strategic Defence Review, the government said, well, what can you get for 3% by the next Parliament? And then they said, what can you get for 3% by 2034? And then what can you get for 3.5%? And as the Prime Minister turned up at the NATO summit, we got the mystery bump up to 5% for defence and security. My suspicion, maybe slightly cynically, is that 1.5% is made up of 0.75% smoke and 0.75% mirrors. But we shall see. And it would be churlish of me, while defence expenditure is going up, to question that. And so what I think is important is therefore to concentrate on how it is to be spent. And I just want to remind the House of an exchange that took place at the Defence Committee the other day with the Chief of the Defence Staff after the publication of the Strategic Defence Review, because he said that we come from a position of strength and this additional expenditure will simply make us stronger and more secure. And I said, obviously I don't expect you to know the answer to this question, but if I were to ask you how many working tanks have we got, he kind of batted it away, and he batted it away in the following way. And I quote, I suppose my caution on that would be, while we are charged with the nation's security and safety, it may be that having 50 tanks or 100 tanks is not necessarily going to be the defining factor as to whether our country remains safe. To me, that is a problem with those questions. I come back to this. Is our readiness at a level that we play our part with our NATO partners achieving deterrence with Russia? Clearly not. Are we really confident about that? The problem with that micro example is that it skips over what is fundamentally our security construct, that we are the beneficiary of a collective group of nations of Europe, Never mind our 50 tanks or our modest increase in the army, they are increasing their armies by tens of thousands, and they are increasing their tanks by hundreds. And I would just suggest to the Minister that she is wary of the voices that she might be getting from certain parts of the Ministry of Defence, if that is the attitude to the fact that we have very few working tanks, because I think that she and the Prime Minister would like some options beyond simply reaching for the nuclear button. There needs to be something in between. And so I hope that she takes that forward in her conversations with the National Armaments Director and their priorities. I did ask the Minister for Defence Procurement, when we discussed the National Armaments Director, whether they would have free range to tear up the book when it comes to defence procurement, because the book certainly needs tearing up. And I speak as someone who, as well as serving on the front line in 4 tours of Northern Ireland, First Gulf War, Second Gulf War, Afghanistan and Sierra Leone, I also managed to squeeze in about 5 years in the Ministry of Defence. And I'm sure the Minister is aware there is a thing called the conspiracy of optimism, which takes place in equipment planning. What happens is people in uniform will tell part truths to the Minister as to how much things are going to cost in order to get them into the programme. It's called entryism, and it's been going on for years. And then all of a sudden, those same people come back and say, Minister, I'm afraid our aircraft carriers aren't going to cost the $2 billion we told you it was going to cost. They're going to cost $6 billion. But what are you going to do? You've already announced them. It's going to cause you huge amounts of political pain. And so when I urged her to tear up the rule book, and she gave me a very positive response that the National Armaments Director will indeed be earning the Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee said £400,000. I think he or she will be on a potential £600,000 with bonuses. I think they've got to be worth that, and I think they've got to have the free range to tear up the book, because as a member of the Defence Select Committee, I don't want them coming back to us to give evidence in a year's time after their initial appointment to say, I wanted to change things, but they just wouldn't let me. And just on this, this is my final point, it was quite telling. Obviously, alongside the appointment of the National Armaments Director, we have defence reform going through as well. And when Lord Robertson and General Barrons came back to the Defence Committee, having published their SDR, I asked them about this, the culture change required in the whole of the reform of defence. And Lord Robertson told a very interesting story about when Colin Powell came to move from uniform and into politics. And he was asked, how do you bring about a culture change in an organisation which has gone in the wrong direction? And General Powell said, well, how do you stop a column of ants? And his answer to himself was, you stamp on the first 10. And I do think that the Minister needs to prepare herself for some seriously robust conversations with the Ministry of Defence. If the money is going to be spent, if it's going to be on things that go back, and it's going to bring about the effect, not just the input.
This government has committed to the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, already boosting spending by £5 billion this year and setting out a path to 2.5% of GDP and beyond. We have today heard about reaching 5% of GDP on defence and security by 2035, and I think it's important that this House is able to scrutinise the trajectory towards getting to those targets. Thankfully, this government has already taken some shorter-term practical steps that I welcome. This includes the largest pay rise to service personnel in 20 years, establishing the new Independent Armed Forces Commissioner to improve service life, and spending an extra £1.5 billion on a record uplift to fix substandard forces housing. But just as importantly, we are thinking differently and changing how defence operates, ending waste, rebuilding capability, and making defence an engine of growth across the country. This is particularly notable in my constituency in the south of Nottingham. Many of my constituents work for Rolls-Royce, and on their behalf I welcome both the £9 billion Unity contract announced in January this year to design, manufacture and provide in-service support for the nuclear reactors that power the Royal Navy's fleet of submarines. Like my honourable friend from Derby North, I also welcome the confirmation that Rolls-Royce will receive £2.5 billion to produce the first small modular reactor, which of course is key to our energy security. Both these announcements are good news for thousands of people in my region, in the East Midlands, who will be part of the supply chain for these two iconic developments. Madam Deputy Speaker, we cannot confront 21st century threats with 20th century systems. The hard-fought lessons from Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine remind us that a military is only as strong as the industrial and technological base that supports it. And that's why I applaud ministers and civil servants for their work on the Strategic Defence Review and the Defence Reform Programme. At the heart of these reforms is the creation of a new National Armaments Director to lead a unified group responsible for procurement, research, support and innovation, and this is a long overdue development.
I thank my honourable friend. Does he agree with me that the new National Armaments Director should have as one of their priorities making sure that the very welcome uplift in spending by this government means that SMEs really do get a fair share of that uplift, and that will really do great things for constituencies like my honourable friends and mine, where there are many smaller and medium-sized businesses who seek to benefit from that process.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I was just about to go on to the fact that under the previous government only 2 of 49 major defence projects were delivered on time, but also that SMEs have been locked out of that procurement process, and so he's absolutely right to highlight the importance of changing that. The new Defence Industrial Strategy puts UK-based firms at the heart of procurement, ensuring government investment strengthens our national security and supports good jobs at home. That is great news for places like Rushcliffe, as I've already said, given it sits at the heart of the East Midlands manufacturing base, which is home to firms in aerospace, engineering and precision technology, all of which are well placed to contribute to our defence future. Importantly, this new direction not only opens the door to a better relationship with new businesses, but for SMEs in Nottinghamshire, they should now be able to be prime contractors. Defence will be accessible, it will be collaborative, and it will be responsive. We will be able to tackle long timelines, improve communication, and of course, we need to invest in skills. As Member of Parliament for Rushcliffe, I will continue to champion policies that bring jobs, investment and innovation to the East Midlands. Defence must absolutely be part of that equation, and our region has a proud industrial heritage and a bright technological future if opportunities like this are developed. Finally, I want to just return to where I began, our armed forces. All of these reforms, strategies and spending commitments come back to them, the people that we ask to defend our democracy, to uphold international law and to respond at moments of crisis. We owe them not just words of thanks during Armed Forces Week, but action, investment and reform every week of the year. Madam Deputy Speaker, this Labour government is serious about defence, serious about keeping Britain secure at home and strong abroad. After years of drift, we are delivering the long-term decisions that are needed to safeguard our country and support our communities. We're not just patching up a broken system, we are building a modern, resilient and forward-looking defence infrastructure, one that reflects the values of our armed forces and the aspirations of our country. I therefore welcome the steps that the government has taken to date and is doing through these estimates.